The story begins with a person extremely irritated by something tapping their foot against the ground in the middle of a rainstorm as if they were very stressed. In the midst of that storm, a light appears in the sky, and quickly a lightning bolt strikes that man, making him fall to the ground unconscious from the force of the shock. Before that happened, on the same day, a young man named Dambyuk is seen sitting in a chair, immersed in his thoughts, paying attention to nothing. 3 people are in front of him, analyzing the boy and interviewing him for a job, and one of the suited men asks how the young man would purify water. Dambyuk, in a friendly manner and with a smile on his face, states that he would use a special government purification machine since it was the fastest and easiest way. Even so, the others conducting the interview seem uninterested, as if they were doing it out of obligation, so one of them moves on to the next question. The suited man finally asks the last question, inquiring why the boy wanted to join that company and if he had any valuable reason. He was about to speak, but before he could, the man interrupts, saying he had reviewed the boy's resume and it seemed like he had no talent or recommendations. Rudely, this man asks if Dambyuk didn't find it embarrassing, given that the company was high level, which leaves the boy shocked and silent. Our protagonist is incredulous at that attitude, suddenly not understanding what the interviewer meant, refusing to believe in that prejudice. The man in the suit with black hair says that if the young man had no talent, he shouldn't be applying to such a large corporation, and that it was shameful. Dambyuk says they shouldn't have put up a poster if they didn't accept just anyone, and the man replies that they only did it because of the anti-discrimination action against people without talents. The young man begins clenching his fists and gripping his clothes tightly, stating that he was hearing this damn conversation about talent again. Yu explains that after the existence of dungeons was revealed, people awaken hidden abilities completely different from anything that existed in that world. Everyone nicknamed these abilities as talents, and because of this, civilization developed quickly and prospered more than in any other year. Some say that the awakening of talent was a blessing for humanity, and our protagonist also believed this until he discovered that he had no talent. We return to the moment when the interviewers were humiliating the boy, stating that people like him were useless, and that he should have a bit of awareness. Dambyuk defiantly comments that they were saying something discriminatory against people without talent and questions if the businessman knew that. The man who was offending you earlier becomes a bit apprehensive and mockingly asks what the boy was talking about. Our protagonist retorts, stating that an interviewer shouldn't speak that way, and the suited men start getting irritated, commenting that they were tired of people like you. They claim that people without talent only hindered the world, and then they begin to insult the boy, saying that he was very rude. Unable to bear hearing that any longer and taking an even more imposing stance, Yu says that demanding proper treatment is not being rude. And with all the anger that was stored in his heart, he orders all 3 of them to apologize to him because what they said was wrong. Arrogantly, one of the interviewers who had previously offended him states that Yu should be the one to apologize since he was the one who wasted their time. Then Dambyuk begins to stand up and assumes that the 3 would not actually apologize, but the men continue to mock the boy. Finally, surprising everyone, Dambyuk pulls out a recorder from his pocket, stating that their entire conversation was recorded on a mini recorder he had. He then adds that the 3 of them definitely said discriminatory things against people without talent and even admitted to posting a false ad. One of the men with glasses tries to fix the situation, saying he was just trying to break the ice and it was a mere joke, but it's not enough to convince you. Dambyuk turns, ready to leave and take action, but the people who were previously insulting him start begging for his forgiveness. However, to the men's disappointment, the boy says that the things they said earlier will be sent to the Human Rights Committee. Upon hearing this, the 3 who were acting arrogantly are completely devastated, knowing their careers were ruined. Already outside the building after a while, the young man is completely irritated, thinking that he might not have talent, but at least he knew how to handle himself well. Looking at a notification on his phone, he realizes that his report had finally reached the Human Rights Committee, so soon enough the men will be punished. While adjusting his tie, Dambyuk thinks that talent is not a blessing for humanity as everyone says. However, before he could finish his thought as he was walking distractedly, the young man steps on gum, staining his shoe and becoming even more irritated. The young man starts complaining that whoever threw that gum on the ground was someone extremely irresponsible and ill-mannered. And before he knows it, a sudden spray of water hits his face, soaking all of his clothes and body, leaving our protagonist drenched before he could even react. One of the gardeners who was trimming the flowers in front of the building apologizes for having done that to the boy and explains that he forgot to turn off the hose. Even after hearing this, the boy remains in shock, thinking that the day was completely terrible and absolutely everything had gone wrong. Later in the afternoon after that interview, the young man finally heads home exhausted after so many bad things happened. He opens his house door and then enters while looking at his window, which is slightly below ground level. He gets irritated as he realizes that once again some drunkards had peed on his window, thinking it was a wall, and now it was dripping down his residence. He starts cleaning up the mess, and the boy takes the opportunity to call his mother, and after the woman answers, he asks if she had already had lunch. After finishing the cleaning, he asks the woman if the hospital food was good, but the woman was worried because the boy was going through so much trouble because of her. Dambyuk's mother was about to say that if his uncle paid the debt, but before she could finish the sentence, Yu gets irritated, stating that she shouldn't talk about that man. Then the woman says that the man is still Yu's uncle, and she tells the boy not to speak like that, but he retorts, saying the guy was just a deadbeat who left him in debt. Realizing that he might have done something wrong, the young man says he wasn't angry and apologizes for yelling at his mother as he had just had a bad day. After that, he lies to the woman, saying that she could rest assured because her son had high standards, was doing very well in society, and would pay the hospital bills. Still troubled by all of this, but not wanting to pass this energy on to his mother, the young man says he would call her later. To try to relieve himself from such a stressful day, the man leaves his house and climbs the stairs up to the street, going to a specific spot where he usually hangs out. There, he begins to take out a cigarette and puts it in his mouth, saying that this couldn't be his only daily pleasure, but it was all he had for now. However, to his dismay, a sudden storm begins to pour, soaking the man's lighter and preventing him from lighting his cigarette and smoking. Looking up and seeing the raindrops falling on his head, our protagonist becomes completely furious, no longer able to bear what was happening. Unable to even enjoy his only pleasure, Yu throws the lighter in his hand to the ground, cursing everything that had happened to him that day. Looking up as if he were speaking to God, he says that the being should at least let him enjoy this because he knew how difficult the young man's life was. The boy tries to talk to the deity, asking why the being was tormenting his life in this way, while thinking that he didn't care if God existed or not. Collapsed on the ground and exhausted, Yu pounds the ground, stating that he didn't want to continue living like a slave and it wasn't his fault since he didn't ask to be born. Staring at his reflection in the puddle of water, the boy thinks that someone had to take responsibility because it wasn't his fault that he was born without talent. All of his anger wasn't directed at God, but at everything bad that was happening in his life, and maybe that's why it happened, as a lightning bolt begins to form. Dambyuk, consumed by rage and believing that it was God's fault, starts cursing the sky while merely observing that mass of energy forming. However, when he realizes it, he only manages to see the lightning bolt heading in his direction, hitting him directly before his brain could process the whole situation. Collapsing on the ground after being struck by the energy, he couldn't believe he was dying without enjoying life, and that it was ending in such a terrible way. A final thought comes to his mind as the young man lies in the puddles of water, and he asks himself what would happen to his mother if he were to die. After some time passes, Dambyuk begins to open his eyes, seeing a beautiful sky above him and the sun starting to rise on a new day. However, with everything that happened, the young man is still somewhat groggy, unable to believe that he was alive after taking that lightning strike. Even so, something strange happens, and when he looks ahead, he notices a holographic screen talking about something related to employment. Seeing that strange technology, he doesn't understand what is happening, and finally, the system informs him that the gods are waiting for the young man. Back at his house after everything that happened, our protagonist changes his clothes and then sits on the floor, questioning himself if God exists. The young man thinks that he was struck by lightning after cursing God, yet he never thought anything bad or good about this being. Yu then says that normally, if you get struck by lightning, you either die or end up in critical condition, but his body had no injuries and that was strange. However, something had changed and now a bizarre message was appearing above him like a holographic screen, similar to those that appear in games. Confused by everything that was happening, Yu thinks that this strange message resembles a status window, which is something only players with talent have. The boy supposes that he might have awakened due to the lightning strike and acquired some talent from that event since it happened after he insulted the deities. So to be sure, he decides to test it, and Dambyuk tries to activate the status window with a voice command. However, the system doesn't seem to do anything and only the holographic message remains there, showing no interaction, as if the young man had given the wrong command. Dambyuk tries to understand what that could be, as the system resembled a part-time job recruitment window, and he knew a lot about that. Upon saying these words, the hologram that had done nothing so far begins to change, as apparently the boy had finally said the right words. Suddenly, various information and a globe appear in front of the boy, and he realizes that it really was a part-time job window. Yu says that up until now, he had only lived by doing these jobs, and he never imagined that when he awakened, he would receive even more work. Our protagonist sighs, stating that he would take this positively since it wasn't like he had anything to lose and would take this opportunity and do his best. The young man then starts to analyze that system window and sees that he had been recruited for a part-time job by the gods. He then tries to accept one of the jobs, but the system rejects it, stating that the boy didn't have enough divinity. Dambyuk then questions what that meant, and the screen explains that divinity is a term for strength, and this term is used by the gods as a way to measure power. He gets irritated, thinking that he had no talent, so why would he have something like divinity? And this was something totally beyond his reach. But the boy begins to think more deeply, commenting that it seems like nothing bad will happen, and perhaps this could be his chance to change his life. Yu, knowing that he had nothing to lose, accepts and decides to try doing something since this might be his only opportunity. The boy begins to analyze that the recruitment for the gods' part-time jobs seems to be structured around part-time jobs across the world. He then starts to search through those jobs to find one that doesn't require divinity, and finally he finds one called dungeon creation in Midgard. Dambyuk begins to analyze various information about that job and realizes that the one seeking workers was Thor. He thinks that this is a job to build a dungeon, those labyrinths that appeared along with the awakening of talents and contain various monsters and challenges inside. Reading this, the boy is shocked, realizing that it is the gods who create the dungeons and wonders if he should believe that. Seeing that the payment would be in Thor's, the boy doesn't quite understand what kind of currency that was, but promptly accepts it. He is suddenly transported to another place, and a creature resembling a dog charges at him to attack. The monster tries to bite our protagonist, who, upon turning around and realizing what it was, cannot react due to his lack of strength. As a method of defense, the boy tries to curl up to protect himself, but at that moment, someone saves him. Suddenly, with frightening speed, a huge being grabs the dog by the neck, preventing it from attacking. A mythological god, extremely tall and strong, with red hair, says that the dog needs to stay still. The god then looks at our protagonist, who is completely shocked by what he was seeing, and asks if the boy was a part-time worker. In a friendly manner, the deity says it's a pleasure to meet the young man, and he introduces himself as Thor, the son of Odin, the god of thunder, a god from Northern Europe. The man walks over to our protagonist, saying that the boy must know well who he is, as he is a famous god. Thor then throws the creature he was holding aside, quickly grabbing our protagonist by the clothing and saying that the two of them would talk on the way. The boy notices that this god had a huge, muscular body and possessed an extremely imposing aura. And looking at the enormous hammer hanging from Thor's waist, Dambyuk supposes that it must be the famous Mjolnir. Still sweating and trying to process everything, Dambyuk stares at Thor, trying to figure out if all of this was really happening or just a dream. To break the silence, the god states that the young man, by his appearance, must be some god from Asia, but Dambyuk doesn't understand what he's talking about. Quickly using his intelligence, the boy supposes that Thor thinks he's a god, so he decides to play along with the conversation. Looking around, he realizes that the place is filled with gods, and he doesn't know who they are, but they are certainly not humans. Determined, the boy affirms in his thoughts that no matter how he looks at the situation, he's the only human there, so he would have to act like a god. Still somewhat uncomfortable with lying to a deity, Yu tells Thor that yes, he is a god, and he is the god of the mountain. Thor gives the boy a light pat on the back, saying that he's heard of him as the young god has helped many in need, which is why Thor likes him. But changing his aura entirely, the man says that it seems the boy is very immersed in human culture, and looking at his clothes, he realizes he's right. Dambyuk starts laughing, saying that he always travels with humans to find out what help they need, and Thor comments that he seems to care a lot about that race. With a serious expression, Thor asks if the young man will be okay, as the work he has to do now is a trial for humans. With all the information he's received and knowing he needs to stay strong, the boy affirms that everything is fine. Thor, then walking in a certain direction, asks if the boy has ever heard of the Minotaur's labyrinth, and Yu replies that he has. The god then, looking towards the horizon, states that the boy will catch up quickly since he already knows about it, and looking to the side, Dambyuk notices something. Yu sees an enormous labyrinth with several people building it, and Thor says that this is the concept of that dungeon. And the god, looking at Dambyuk, says that the boy will help them build that labyrinth. After some time working, our protagonist was observing something and remarking that it was incredible, while one of the workers informs him that he is late. The thing Dambyuk was observing was an imposing gate with a minotaur sculpted on it. Returning to reality, the young man responds that he is on his way. Yu then starts to climb out of a hole, and at that moment, several servants building the dungeon are conversing. No matter what time of day it was, whenever work came up, our protagonist made a point to arrive quickly and help with whatever was needed. The young man's boss, who is overseeing the construction, says that he works very hard and asks the boy to be careful not to fall into any pits around. Kindly, Yu turns and says that if he does fall, his boss should save him. His boss is an ogre with red skin and a head with little hair, and after a long day of work, he tells Dambyuk that that's enough for the day. After that, the ogre turns and asks what the boy thinks of the job, and the boy responds that it's good since the tasks are simple and he's already used to them. As they walk, the ogre comments that it seems everything is finished, so the young man can go to the cart to catch his breath since they will travel to the next area. Already at night and during the journey, the creature asks if all the gods of Asia are as energetic as Yu, but he says that it all depends on each one's personality. The ogre comments that because of the boy's good work, some people have been praising him for being hardworking, and Yu responds that all of this is just an exaggeration. But in his mind, he wasn't being humble at all. Instead, he was thinking that these were his 200% social skills, and he was very good at it. Our protagonist begins to think that talent isn't everything, and if he continues building his connections with the gods of that world, he will surely gain advantages. Finally, when the cart ride ends and they reach deeper into the dungeon, the ogre tells the boy that they will have to leave the cart and walk from that point onward. Looking at the animal pulling the cart, the boss tells Yu that if they use that useless creature, they'll end up falling into every trap that's been set, While working and carrying a box, the young man almost steps into a trap for a moment, and the ogre quickly warns him to be careful where he steps. The creature points to a drawing on the ground and explains that it's a trap rune and Dambiak should be cautious. The ogre then begins pointing out several traps nearby, and Yu remarks that things could have gone really wrong if he hadn't known about them. Finally, that god supposes that this is Dambiak's first time doing this kind of work, so he advises Yu he use the opportunity to gain experience. He explains that high-ranking gods offer trials to humans, but low-ranking gods can't participate, so they end up doing things like this. He also mentions that they have an infinite amount of work because they constantly need to create new dungeons, and Yu is shocked to learn they have infinite work. Ignoring the young man, the ogre comments that the hall where they started working seems to be finished, so the boss tells Yu that they should go take a look. Inside an extremely luxurious and gigantic hall, the boy comments that they created all of that from rocks in just a few minutes, and it's impressive. Nervously, he thinks that it's extremely huge and questions himself about what might appear there for them to have built something so large. Finally, the two finish their work by placing the boxes they were carrying on the ground, and the ogre explains that this will be the first trial area for the humans. When Dambiak opens one of the boxes and looks closely at what's inside, he doesn't quite understand what he sees. Our protagonist doesn't understand why there's an oval stone there, but the ogre explains that it's not a normal stone but an egg that will hatch a venomous spider. He adds that if they release the spiders there, the creatures will be very troublesome to deal with and will give the humans a hard time, allowing the gods more time to finish building the dungeon. Looking into another box, he is surprised by what he sees and asks what kind of monster that specific one is. The other god informs him that it's a lizard man, and lying in a sort of tomb, there's a green-skinned monster resting. Dambiak notices that the beast's neck appears somewhat transparent, which is fascinating, so he asks why it's semi-translucent. The ogre explains that the young man should be careful because the lizardman hasn't finished materializing, and Yu apologizes, saying it's his first time seeing something like that. The boss then asks Yu to follow him as they head to the next hall, and after going deeper in, the god explains that this is the goblin's ambush area. Walking through the area, the creature explains that if the humans reach that point, it means they are almost at the end of the dungeon, and Yu notices that the place is a bit damp. However, a noise startles the boy, leaving him frightened, and when he looks to the side, he's shocked by what he sees. The young man notices a huge creature with long hair standing in the darkness of the rocks. The goblin beast, which had been resting with its eyes closed, awakens upon noticing the boy's presence, becoming extremely aggressive. And when Dambiak sees the immense beast coming toward him, the only thing you can do is scream in fear. The young man even falls backward, but to his surprise, the green creature starts laughing, leaving our protagonist even more confused. The ogre also begins to laugh, saying that the boy got scared for no reason, as the goblins are only preparing for now, and he doesn't need to be afraid. However, when the dungeon is complete, the story changes as those creatures are more cunning and intelligent than they seem, so it will be quite challenging for humans to deal with them. Irritated for having fallen for a prank, our protagonist says that they really do seem to be all that. The two arrive at the immense gate that the young man saw at the beginning of the chapter, and the ogre comments that this was the end of the labyrinth. In front of that massive entrance, the ogre confirms the boy's thoughts, stating that this was the final boss's hall, home to one of the most powerful creatures, the Great Minotaur Chief. Interrupting that moment, Thor arrives, laughing and greeting the god of the mountain. Quickly, both the ogre and our protagonist bow, and Thor adds that everyone has been praising Yu, then asks if the work was going smoothly, to which Dambiak responds affirmatively. After Dambiak compliments the job, Thor comments that the boy knows how to say the right things and asks the ogre if the distribution of monsters is finished. The ogre comments that it is, but only the final part of the process remains, and the Norse god states that everything is going very well. Suddenly, Thor draws Mjolnir from his waist and quickly says that since they were in the final stage, the low-ranking gods should clock out and rest. Yu is extremely frightened seeing the lightning emitted from Mjolnir, and asks why the man is suddenly doing that with the hammer. However, Thor doesn't listen and says that the god of the mountain did very well, adding that if they meet again, he wants to hear more about the Asian dungeons. Then he bids farewell to Dambiak, and right after that, Thor strikes the young man with his hammer. It's as if a barrier between two worlds has been launched, and our protagonist is hurled to another place. Frightened by everything that happened, Yu curls up, scared that he might have died. Seeing that he wasn't killed by Thor, the young man begins to look around, trying to understand where he is. Realizing that he's in his home, he feels relieved, saying that Thor finished their work in a wild way, and he thought the god had discovered he was human. As he observes his hand, the boy also affirms that the most important thing was that it was all very real. So it wasn't a hallucination or a dream. He really experienced an awakening, practically crying with joy at this news. Immediately afterward, Yu begins to cry, finally having unlocked what he had dreamed of for years. The system finally appears, stating that his payment has been sent, and seeing this, our protagonist becomes extremely excited. Trembling with enthusiasm, the young man starts to fiddle with the holographic screen to take a look at what he had received. The screen starts to change on its own, then states that the god's shop is loading, and upon realizing this, Yu is extremely shocked by what he's seeing. The god's shop has items like the spear of the almighty god Odin, which never misses its target, the armor of the Nemean lion, a powerful armor, even Freya's necklace, which allows travel between dimensions. All of these are some of the most powerful items sold in the god's shop, and our protagonist can buy them. There are other options, such as Thor's lightning power, Hephaestus' fire power, and Ares' power of destruction. As he sees all this, the young man wonders what he could do if he could buy all of it. He imagines that if he could buy everything, he would be practically a god in a human body and would surely be revered by many people. However, the young man returns to the reality that he is still a weakling that no one pays attention to. Determined with his goals, he clenches his fists, affirming that his life will start to change from that day forward. However, to his misfortune, when he checks the system, he sees that something had gone wrong with the transaction and it had been declined. The young man explains that the cheapest of those powers or items was 70,000 Thors, and he didn't have enough money to buy it. With the payment he received, the boy begins to search the shop for something he could acquire with just the amount he had. Yu is surprised to find that he could acquire high-ranking talents in that god's shop. Dambyug is ecstatic, realizing that all he needed to do was buy it to acquire what he always wanted, and this was something too good for someone like him. With this, Yu begins to bite his nails and starts to get nervous, saying that the most important thing is the price, so he shouldn't get too excited before checking it. Upon checking, he finds that an SS rank talent is only 12 Thors, and while there were things in the shop that cost more than 70,000, the talent was only that price. Reading the comments, the boy notices that there are various criticisms as the sacred gods don't want to acquire mere talents since they already have powers, and that's why it's cheap. Seeing this, Dambyuk gets irritated, stating that it was nonsense since it was an SS rank talent and not just a simple talent. This rank possesses incredible abilities. The young man starts searching for some talents he liked and recalling his childhood. He says that he had always loved swords when he was younger. Without thinking twice, the boy quickly clicks on the holographic screen and purchases the SS rank sword talent. After acquiring that power, an aura begins to flow through the young man's body, and the system starts to do something. Looking at his golden hands, the boy realizes that it worked, and he thinks about how much he did just to get an F rank talent, never expecting that getting an S of rank 1 would be so easy. The system also rewards Yu for purchasing his first item from the shop, and because of an event, he could acquire another talent of the same rank. Dambyuk can't believe that all of this is real and starts crying because he had managed to get what he always dreamed of in the blink of an eye. Yu begins searching through that vast array of talents for one that suits him, and upon finding the SS rank combat talent, he chooses it. Our protagonist starts jumping, thanking God for getting that power and finally having what he always dreamed of. However, his vision begins to blur and the boy starts to feel dizzy and unsteady. As he falls to the ground, the boy begins to pass out and then questions what was happening since his whole body was hurting. The system informs him that it's strengthening his body because being weak, he needed an upgrade to handle the talents. Then veins start to bulge from the young man's body, enhancing all his physical characteristics like muscle strength and lung capacity. Finally, the system informs Yu that his body has been successfully strengthened, but he can't endure the pain and then passes out. In a vision, the boy sees a beautiful woman who is his mother calling his name. The woman apologizes for being such an incompetent mother and making the young man suffer, but he retorts, telling her not to say such things. When he's about to mention that he has a new talent, the figure responds that he couldn't possibly have something like that, and suddenly, the boy wakes up on the floor of his house. As he gets up, the boy says that his head is hurting a lot and tries to understand when he fell asleep, also thinking that he saw his mother in a dream. Yu panics, thinking that everything he experienced with the gods might have been just a dream. So the boy promptly activates the status window and the system appears, informing him of his abilities and that he is now a lower-ranking god. Seeing this, the boy supposes that it was because he was a lower-ranking god that he was able to work in the dungeon, so he is no longer a human. Sighing in relief that it wasn't a dream, the boy also comments that a talentless man like him suddenly becoming a god proves that life is unexpected. Dambyuk's phone starts ringing, and when he looks at the device, he notices that it cracked when he fainted, but ignoring that, the young man realizes that his mother is calling. Answering the call, the young man promptly responds with a smile on his face, saying he has good news, but the woman asks him not to go to the hospital that day. Yu panics, trying to understand what had happened, and the woman responds that Ichigo shouldn't worry and not go to the hospital. The boy keeps insisting, trying to understand why he can't go, and someone takes his mother's phone, asking if Yu is the guardian of Mrs. Cho Yunwei. The person who took the phone informs him that they are in a difficult situation and can't give more details, but there are signs that a dungeon has appeared near the hospital. The doctor continues saying something, but when he doesn't get a response, he finds it strange, and it is shown that Yu had run off toward the hospital worried about his mother. Dambyuk drops his phone on the ground and in desperation refuses to leave his mother in danger, quickly starting to run toward the hospital. Crying knowing that she's all he has, the boy begins to sweat and gasp for breath. Near the hospital where the dungeon is emerging, a strong storm is in the sky and a helicopter is hovering over the area. Almost the entire region has already been secured, with various military personnel walking through the streets trying to understand the situation. Even a TV station was conducting an interview, and the reporter mentioned that they had just arrived, and as the viewers could see, there were signs of a dungeon. With a megaphone, a soldier starts shouting that the area is restricted, so he kindly asks all civilians to evacuate the area. A rideshare car arrives at high speed near the site, and from there our protagonist disembarks, desperate, fearing that something might happen. Many people are gathered near the location since it's a rare event that many want to witness, but the soldier continues, urging them to leave. Yu, seeing the whole situation, doesn't understand what is happening. The young man questions what all of this is about, but suddenly the system informs him that the combat focus ability has been activated. As if he were using binoculars, the boy can perfectly hear and clearly see the soldier who is speaking. He realizes that the man is shouting for everyone to leave since it's a restricted area, and Yu wonders why he can suddenly see and hear the man so clearly. Our protagonist also begins to overhear a conversation between soldiers even farther away, talking about how the government is gathering all the available hunters. One of the soldiers asks his superior if he thinks one of the 8-star hunters will come by, and the man replies that he heard they would since that dungeon seems dangerous. Around Yu, for some reason, the young man could hear all the conversations and interactions people were having. With so much information flooding his head, the boy becomes desperate, assuming that he can hear everything because of the talents he acquired. But shaking off his thoughts, the young man affirms that it's not the time to be thinking. He needs to reach the hospital quickly. Pushing through and entering the crowd, our protagonist asks the soldier for permission, stating that his family is nearby and he needs to get in. However, the man refuses since there were signs that a labyrinth was forming in that dungeon, so they couldn't let the young man enter. Upon hearing the word labyrinth, something clicks in our protagonist's mind, as if a hypothesis he refuses to believe starts forming. The storm that was previously only in the sky emits a huge flash, and then hearing a loud boom, the soldier and Yu realize what it is. Yu and the entire crowd around him witness a massive lightning strike hitting the ground. Debris flies toward the civilians standing there as our protagonist tries to shield himself with his hands. After all the noise and chaos dissipates, Yu is lying on the ground after everything that happened. Trying to get up, the boy wonders what just occurred as he looks around and sees the destruction left by that lightning strike. The young man notices that at the exact spot where the lightning hit, a portal has appeared, and he confirms his theory. A sort of wormhole with various magical runes appeared, causing everything nearby to levitate as if it were sucking whatever it could. Looking into the portal, the young man sees what he didn't want to see. He realizes that it's the dungeon he built with Thor. In a flashback, we see our protagonist observing the construction of the dungeon with the other gods doing that work. With a pickaxe in his hands and looking at it, the boy said that seeing it that way, it was pretty incredible and extremely beautiful. He just hadn't realized it until now because he hadn't faced it, but now that he looked deeply, he saw that the dungeon was indeed beautiful. We return to the present moment where the boy is staring at the portal that appeared before him, wondering what the heck happened. Looking at the wormhole, he can't believe he's seeing it right there, becoming apprehensive afterward. The boy keeps asking himself why that specific dungeon is in that place, but as he looks to the side, he sees an old man coughing from the smoke. He helps the man up and asks if he's okay, but the man replies that they both need to evacuate immediately. For some reason, our protagonist senses something strange and quickly pushes the man away. This causes the already injured man to fall to the ground, but it also prevents him from being struck by a knife that flies between him and Yu. Dambyuk also narrowly escapes, and upon seeing the weapon embedded in a post, he wonders why it's there. Turning his attention to the side, Yu starts hearing some growls from a beast. An adventurer who had gone to the dungeon was completely wounded, with a sword piercing his chest, and in his final moments he pleads with Yu to run away. When the lifeless body of the adventurer falls to the ground, behind him a lizard creature that Dambyuk had seen before is revealed. The beast, with his blood-stained sword and enormous claws, steps on the body of the human lying before it. Yu, still on the ground, shouts to everyone that there are lizard men attacking the area, and suddenly, several of those beasts appear to attack the citizens. The military commander warns everyone that lizard men have appeared at the front line, and he orders his platoon to open fire on the monsters. A massive barrage of bullets is unleashed toward the monsters. Some are hit by the projectiles, but others manage to evade. Amidst the crossfire, Dambyuk takes cover behind a car to avoid getting hit and tries to warn the soldiers that there are civilians in the area, but no one hears him. One of the beasts, not in the line of fire, charges at Yu, intending to end the life of the human in front of it. Without any mercy, the monster swings its sword in an upward slash, hurling his blade toward the boy. The young man, confused by everything happening, suddenly becomes paralyzed as he sees the weapon coming toward him until his combat focus ability activates. A blue energy begins to flow through the boy's body as he lies on the ground, and he can see the weapon coming toward him in slow motion. Yu feels as if time itself has slowed down, allowing him to perfectly observe the movements of the lizard beast. For some reason, our protagonist manages to stop the blade coming his way by grabbing it by the non-lethal part. With the sword in his hand, the young man immediately drops it, panicked, not understanding how he just caught a moving blade. He then shifts his attention back to the lizard, which is trying to attack the injured old man lying next to him. Yu tries to warn the old man, but the man is too hurt to react, and the lizard moves in to finish him off, with the soldiers unable to respond in time. Desperate to save the human, Dambyuk immediately lunges, grabbing the lizard by the waist and slamming it to the ground. The military commander, who had not yet noticed the presence of civilians upon seeing Yu and the injured old man, immediately orders all soldiers to cease fire. Another soldier comments that even if Dambyuk is a hunter, it's madness to be in the middle of a conflict unarmed and he's as good as dead. Raising his guard to defend himself, Yu continues trembling, realizing that he charged in out of anger and now doesn't know what to do. Once again, another one of the monsters charges to finish off the boy, and at that moment, the boy curls up and apologizes. Luckily, his combatability activates again, allowing the young man to easily dodge the attack by moving backward. Still unaccustomed to these reflexes, he remains confused, trying to assimilate his new abilities. The lizard, taking advantage of this moment, charges at the boy's back, ready to stab him and finish off the foolish human. Even with two monsters attacking him simultaneously, the young man manages to dodge and, in his thoughts, realizes that this is the combat focus ability he had acquired. Watching his enemies' attacks, the boy comments that he can clearly see their movements and even react to them. Surprising the monster, the boy quickly charges at it, ready to deliver a punch to the creature's stomach. Just as he is about to strike the beast, his SS rank combat talent activates, allowing Dambyuk to unleash a flurry of attacks on the monster. Finally, the boy finishes with a massive punch to the creature's face, sending it flying and killing it. A red aura courses through Yu's body, and the boy is impressed that his strategy had actually worked. However, the fight is not over yet, as two more beasts remain. The young man prepares to face them and end the battle once and for all. Even with the lizard attacking our protagonist from behind, the boy manages to dodge by ducking and quickly uses the motion to spin around. Using the momentum from his spin, the boy delivers a powerful spinning kick right to the lizard's jaw, instantly defeating it. The other creature, seeing its companion defeated, doesn't stay idle and drags its sword along the ground, ready to strike Yu's back. With ease, the boy performs a backflip, even impressing the lizard as it sees the boy airborne. As he reaches the peak of his jump, the young man lands on the ground, stomping on the lizard's skull, crushing it against the floor. The soldiers who were merely observing the whole scene were astonished, saying it was impressive. They couldn't believe that Guy defeated the lizard men with just his bare hands and even doubted what they had seen right before their eyes. A stranger with long white hair arrived at the scene, simply commenting that it was interesting. The man, who appeared a bit older and had several scars, asked Yu which guild he belonged to. This old man was accompanied by several people who were finishing off the lizards, and he remarked that our protagonist was quite skilled, especially for someone so young. The elderly man introduced himself as Namung Doak, the master of the Sangun Guild, a person who had fought in many battles. Shaking Dambyuk's hand, he stated that no one from a guild would have come alone and asked if the boy was an unaffiliated hunter, to which the young man, attempting to lie, agreed. Namdang explained that he and his guild were there to clear the dungeon and asked if the boy wanted to join them, but Yu remained somewhat confused. Looking at the portal, the young man declared that he was no longer an ordinary person, and after everything he had done, he felt motivated to go there. The boy, glancing at the hospital where his mother was, thought that monsters would continue to emerge from the dungeon, and if they couldn't stop them there, something bad could happen. Determined, Yu clenched his fists, stating that it would be easy, there wouldn't be any problems, and he would do everything to protect his beloved mother. Driven by his desires, the young man agreed with Namgun. The group of adventurers began to walk through the dark and damp cave, carefully moving through every part. As Yu touched the walls to check for traps, he asked the old man and the guild to follow him. One of Namung's guild members started marking their path to avoid getting lost, and as he watched this, Dambyuk thought that he had memorized the place. Suddenly, the young boy asked everyone to wait, and the guild leader inquired what the problem was. Arrogantly, our protagonist said that from this point onward, he would lead the way, even though he was a novice. One of the guild members heard this and became deeply irritated, considering that the unaffiliated hunter, despite not knowing where he came from, should understand the chain of command. Dambyuk then explained that from that point onward, there were pits and traps, which was why he wanted to lead to prevent them from getting hurt. Nambyung thanked the boy for his concern, but insisted that their advance team should have already cleared the path. However, Yu disagreed, and to prove his point, picked up a stone to conduct an experiment. The young man quickly threw the rock into a dark area. When it landed, it triggered a trap rune, and several spears shot up from the ground, shattering the poor rock into pieces. Everyone, including the guild leader, was astonished by this, and Dambyuk asserted that he was sure their advance team hadn't passed that way. Approaching the activated rune, he explained that the trap was triggered by pressure, and the spears were made of a special alloy that could pierce any armor. However, the guild leader, seeing this, questioned how the boy knew that, and Yu thought that if he told them he had helped build the dungeon, it might not go well for him. Sweating profusely and nervous about what answer to give, the young man began to breathe heavily, explaining that it was just a trade secret he couldn't reveal. So the entire guild followed our protagonist as he led them, saving everyone from potentially dangerous traps. Suddenly, after a while of walking, Yu stopped near a torch and removed it from the wall. The young man seemed apprehensive, and the guild leader asked what the problem was. Finally, our protagonist explained that from this point forward, it would become more dangerous, and he raised the torch to illuminate something ahead of them. The guild leader and all the members were impressed when they saw something specific, as if they had a bad premonition. In front of the group, they saw a door with a spider symbol, and remembering this, Yu asked the guild members to prepare for battle. Upon entering the spider's lair, one of the guild soldiers stepped on a spider, causing green blood to spill onto the ground. The person became irritated because the spider's blood got on his foot, but another soldier next to him commented that the plan could go wrong and they might end up burning everything. One of the guild members explained that these scattered spider webs acted as their communication network and also as traps, so it would be easier to burn them. The men continue talking, speculating that the plan was suggested by our protagonist, who might be a spy from another guild, and with his power, you can hear everything. As he analyzes the place, the boy seems to grow apprehensive, remembering what he had done there. Yu recalls that it was in that room where he placed countless boxes of spider eggs and knows the exact number that are there. Moreover, he knows where all the spiders are hiding, so it wouldn't take much effort to burn them all to ashes. The soldiers are about to start burning the webs, but before they do, they remark that the webs are very dense and interesting. However, at that moment, Yu's combat focus ability activates and the boy hears someone in the distance crying out for help, covered in spider webs. Realizing this, the boy stops the soldier from setting the fire, leaving the man extremely confused. The boy tells everyone there that he believes they shouldn't use fire because someone might be in danger. The guild then gathers outside, and the leader begins explaining that they discovered signs of human presence inside the stone chamber, and their priority is to save them. He explains that when they enter, the entire attack squad will form a defensive structure since they don't know the condition of the survivors. Finally, the man concludes that he doesn't know how Danbiuk knew, but the young man seems to have an idea of the survivors' location, so the support team will follow his orders. Hearing that he has to take responsibility for an entire group of people, the boy becomes irritated because it's a huge responsibility, and he's never done anything like this before. Suddenly, a girl, also dressed like the guild's soldiers but without a mask, appears on the scene. Knowing this could go wrong, Yu walks over to Namem to try to convince him that this was a bad idea, but a girl approaches the young man calling his name. When he hears his name, Danbiuk turns around, and upon noticing the presence of this unfamiliar girl, he quickly turns back, trying to understand what she wants. The girl extends her hand and says that it was thanks to the boy that they managed to cross the trap area, so she asks Yu to guide them again. Seeing all this, the boy feels somewhat confused, not understanding the sudden reaction of this unfamiliar girl, but he agrees. The boy also extends his hand to shake the stranger's hand, stating that they would succeed together, but before he could continue speaking, the girl interrupts him. She asks Danbiuk not to worry too much, assuring him that with his orders, he only needs to inform the support team of the survivor's location. Yu seems somewhat uncomfortable and asks if it will really be that simple, to which the girl agrees, but he still doesn't seem satisfied. Awkwardly, he asks the girl to let go of his hand, and she questions whether he uses weapons. Our protagonist responds that he's never used anything like that, and for some reason, without Yu noticing, the stranger's eyes were gleaming. As she turns and releases the boy's hand, the girl comments that it would be smart for him to carry a sword or two to avoid any risk. Finally, the girl says she's leaving and our protagonist agrees, but he thinks she just said what she wanted and left, which seems strange. For some reason, he starts thinking about something that bothers him even more, and Yu realizes that at no point did he mention his name. However, before he could dwell on it, when he looks back at the girl, she had disappeared, and at that moment, the guild group was preparing to attack. Back in the spider's lair, all the soldiers are now ready for combat, and each group is prepared for their respective mission. One of the members comments that it's too quiet, but the guild leader tells everyone not to lose focus and stay silent, and Yu suddenly notices something. With his new talent, he detects something strange and feeling a bad premonition. The boy immediately warns that something is above them. Huge spiders with a monstrous appearance begin to drop from the ceiling, hanging from their webs, and seeing this, the soldiers wonder why they are so big. The spiders finally reach the ground, and one of the masked soldiers, upon seeing the size of the monster, is paralyzed with fear, his only reaction being to call for help. The guild master, seeing this, quickly assumes a fighting stance, drawing his axe to defend one of his soldiers from the claws of the monster. Without hesitation, he charges at the spider, cutting it down instantly and saving the poor man who was on the verge of wetting his pants in desperation. Namgang gets irritated with his soldier, who momentarily let down his guard and nearly costing him his life, and he orders everyone not to get in the way and to stick to the plan. The old man also commands everyone to form a defensive structure, and thus a battle against the arachnids begins with our protagonist leading the support team. Yu uses his power to scan the vastness of the palace in front of him, searching for the survivors. Finally, after a long walk, they find the civilians wrapped in webs and stuck to the wall, and the support team with the boy prepares to rescue them. The captured people are encased in web cocoons and look utterly drained, as if their life force had been sucked out. Immediately, the support team helps lower all the survivors and save them, also assisting the civilians in getting back on their feet. However, to everyone's dismay, a group of spiders, seeing their food being taken, quickly moves toward the support team. While carrying a person on his back, Dambiak shouts that he knows a way out and will lead the group there. During his fight, Nambang pauses and observes the boy's actions from afar, then remarks that he is very suspicious of the young man. The man continues to ponder but doesn't waver, refocusing on the battle and swiftly slicing an enormous spider in half right in front of him. Duik thinks that Yu knows exactly the paths of the dungeon and even more, the location of the survivors, which is strange and something he's never encountered before. At that moment, Dambiak is helping to save even more survivors in another direction. One of the soldiers there shouts for all the injured people to head in a certain direction, saying that everyone needs to evacuate the dungeon. The boy tells his master that all the survivors have been saved and no one was hurt, to which the man responds that they will keep up the pace and move forward. At that moment, Namgang says he wants to talk to Yu, and the boy becomes extremely nervous, thinking he's been found out. Even with everything going well, one of the guild's soldiers is not happy, watching Dambiak from a distance and feeling irritated with the young man for some reason. After the battle ends and all the spiders are defeated, the master states that all the people who were captured have been saved and are no longer at risk of death. The man also concludes that if it hadn't been for Yu, they might have accidentally burned all the civilians without realizing it, but the young man modestly says it was nothing. Changing the subject, Duik comments that the boy's talent is incredible, almost as if he had personally built the dungeon, and Yu immediately denies it. Nervously thinking he's been discovered, the young man begins to stammer, saying there's no way he could have built the dungeon alone since he's not a god, but Nambang laughs and says he was just joking. Finally, Yu ignores the comment and suggests they should gather their strength and continue, but inside, the boy is extremely relieved that he hasn't been found out. After a long walk, they once again arrive in front of a huge gate with an unknown sculpture carved into it. One of the soldiers wonders if it's something from Incan civilization, but Dambiak responds that it belongs to the goblins. They begin to talk, expressing disappointment that it doesn't seem like a boss room, but unlike them, Yu doesn't underestimate those creatures. He thinks that this is the goblins' ambush area and can't think of a foolproof plan since only his combat-focused ability might be useful in there. Surprising everyone, the boy apologizes but then asks if he can enter the place alone, and the entire guild is shocked. One of the masked members gets irritated, saying that the boy is too full of himself just because the master praised him a little, as all the guild members have faced goblins before, so it should be fine. Nambang somewhat agrees, stating that he doesn't feel comfortable sending Dambiak alone into such a dangerous place. Yu then argues that they have no choice, so everyone should follow his orders when they enter, and the guild leader agrees as the boy seems to have a plan. The nosy one, who has been irritated with Yu from the beginning, thinks he wanted to use this chance to show off to the master, but because of that random hunter, he couldn't shine. He and his friends seem to be plotting something extremely malicious against Dambiak, but at that exact moment, their master announces that they are entering the place. They all pass through the door, and upon arriving in the room, they notice it appears to be a beautiful and rustic hall. The guild members start looking around but realize that there seems to be nothing and no one there. Dambiak asks everyone to be quiet because he feels something inside, and the boy constantly has an extremely bad premonition. The two who had been trying to catch the master's attention start mocking the boy, saying there doesn't seem to be anything there and that the young man is just scared. Suddenly, all the torches that were previously lit begin to go out, plunging the entire area into darkness, and the soldiers decide to turn on their lights. Yu immediately says they shouldn't do that, but the guy who was already angry with him retorts that they won't be able to see or fight without the lanterns. Finally, the man switches on his light and claims that if Yu is so scared, he can just stay behind everyone. However, Gambiat becomes extremely worried and immediately orders everyone to get down, even the guild leader obeys. The two who have been plotting against our protagonist remain standing. For some reason, silence falls over the entire area, and the nosy guide points his lantern in one direction, but it reveals nothing. His friend, standing with him, says there's nothing there and asks why he's acting like that since he was standing still. As he turns around, it's revealed that he had been hit by 3 arrows in the chest and could barely stay on his feet. Before he can even fall to the ground, dozens of arrows from all directions strike him, ending his life instantly. Everyone panics, horrified by what just happened, and the friend of the fallen man, seeing his companion drop, becomes enraged. Chaos ensues, and knowing he needs to maintain order, Namgung says that no one should move a muscle. Following their leader's orders, most of them immediately stop and don't move or even breathe. Namdong asks Yu if this was the reason they couldn't turn on the lanterns, and the boy agrees, explaining that the goblins will attack whenever they see light. The guild leader seems confused, as no one had been attacked since they entered, and asks why that is. Our protagonist explains that the goblins are toying with their prey. The goblins want to savor the sight of the people trembling in the darkness, falling into despair. Manbun becomes extremely concerned, realizing they can't fight what they can't see, and this will lead to their defeat. However, Dambiak responds that he can fight without seeing. Duak is skeptical, questioning how that's possible, and Dambiak, with his eyes glowing blue, says he'll take care of the situation. Amidst all the people who are standing still and immobile, the boy stands up and begins making a loud noise. As he walks, he says he knows everyone else is nervous because they can't do anything, but he's going to do what's necessary to save them. Finally, the boy asserts that everything will be okay, and no one should move or make any noise until he's done. The boy then begins to breathe deeply, stating that he needs to focus and recall that sensation from when he defeated the lizard men. Yu activates his combat focus ability and is able to see the location of all the goblin beasts inside the room. He quickly starts to take action, and the people who are standing still can only hear some screams echoing through the palace. After a short time, the boy announces that everyone can turn on their lights, and when they do, they see several goblin bodies on the ground and our protagonist finishing off the last one. As the goblins stop struggling, everyone who witnesses the scene is astonished, unable to understand what the boy's talent is or what kind of trick he's using. The guy, who was already irritated and even saw his friend die, doesn't let go of his hatred, claiming that if he had a little more time, he could have handled it. Manbun is extremely pleased, commenting that the young man is truly incredible, as he has been a hunter all his life and has never seen anyone fight like Dambiak. Even the young man himself thinks that he didn't know he could fight like that and tells the guild leader that he just got lucky and they should continue. Finally, they all arrive at the room holding a deadly beast, and our protagonist confirms what everyone wanted to hear, that this is the end of the labyrinth and the final boss room. Inside, they can see an extremely furious minotaur with reddish skin and enormous horns, ready to defend its domain. Everyone in the group observes the imposing gate and, without wasting time, opens it. As they enter the room, the guildmaster says he can't see anything and questions whether the supposedly strong Minotaur commander is hiding somewhere. Extremely apprehensive, our protagonist comments that no, on the contrary, the monster is right in front of them. After the door slowly closes, all the torches around the room start to light up, revealing something surprising. In front of them, there is a staircase, and at the top, a throne where the mighty Minotaur sits. The horned beast has an extremely furious expression, and Dambiak states that this is the master of the dungeon. Manbun stares at the beast for a while and, despite his nerves, says that the creature is emanating a great pressure, which was to be expected. The man tells you that he can see from there that the monster won't initiate an attack, so they have time to strategize and understand the characteristics of the place. Suddenly, the system appears, informing that the Minotaur's human sacrifice has begun, and that our protagonist must choose 5 candidates for the sacrifice. Reading this, the boy becomes confused and doesn't fully understand what it means. Looking at Namban and listening to the old man strategizing for the team without noticing the system, Yu supposes that the screen is only visible to him. Dambiak starts making several assumptions, but the most logical one is that it might be a hint for a safe passage, so sharing that information would be essential. He quickly approaches the guild group and says he wants to propose something, but the leader asks if you could talk about it later. Even so, the boy insists, saying it might be information related to solving the dungeon, and the old man asks if he's sure. The two go off to a corner to discuss a specific plan, but someone watching them is not pleased. The same white-haired man who was angry at Dambiak is there, hating the boy and thinking that he's once again trying to steal the credit. Determined to do something about it, he thinks he can't just stand by and watch you do the same thing, so he starts sneaking away. After walking a bit closer to the boss, the nosy man hides behind a pillar. He believes that strategies are for losers and is certain he can defeat the bull with ease. Drawing a crossbow, the man aims it at the monster, declaring that he'll show the power of his F-ranked accuracy talent to that Minotaur and only needs to hit it once. Even so, the man needs to get a bit closer to ensure a hit. As he steps forward, he unknowingly crosses a barrier. Realizing what has happened, Dambiak becomes extremely worried, immediately turning to look in the direction of the Minotaur. He tries to stop the man from proceeding, but the nosy man ignores him and becomes even angrier with our protagonist. The man accuses Yu of wanting to take all the credit for himself, saying that if the boss is just standing there, he'll be defeated. Finally, breaking the strategy they were working on, the man crosses the barrier and an alert appears, warning that the rules have been broken and 5 people have been chosen. Something begins to happen, and the bodies of some people are covered in a blue aura, leaving everyone confused and questioning what it is. A bright light is emitted, momentarily blinding everyone, but when the nosy man opens his eyes, he realizes he's made a grave mistake. Nambaum is shocked, and seeing that his companion is to blame, he becomes furious, telling the man that he's ruined everything. Even Dambiak is extremely astonished, stating that this isn't the time to debate right or wrong decisions because there's something to fear. In total, 5 people, including the leader and Yu, are transported to the center of the room, and before them, the Minotaur creature is ready to attack. The monster suddenly lets out a massive roar, leaving everyone deafened for a moment. Seeing what he had done, the nosy man falls back, trying to crawl away and escape the situation, but he ends up bumping into a purple wall. Realizing he can't escape by crawling, the man quickly stands up and tries to break through the barrier, desperately wanting to get out, but to no avail. The Minotaur seizes the opportunity to finish off one of its enemies, charging at him. However, the nosy man's leader notices and saves his subordinate just in time. Manbang quickly becomes desperate, drawing his 2 axes and ordering everyone to form up and not panic. He also comments that they all need to stick to the strategy, which is for everyone to stay organized while he battles the Minotaur. Then the man charges forward. The bull tries to attack Namdang with its axe, but the old man is highly agile and manages to dodge the strike. The beast raises its weapon once again to deliver an even more powerful blow, but when it strikes, it realizes it has only hit the ground. The old man is now in the air. Namdang seizes this opportunity to strike the monster directly, causing a massive crash that echoes throughout the area. The guild members within the barrier, hearing the crash, begin to celebrate, thinking they've already won. Yu watches the entire scene in shock, remarking that the guild master is on another level, but something doesn't seem right. For some reason, after delivering the attack, the old man is irritated, as if something had gone wrong, cursing the beast. Despite his powerful blow, all he managed to do was leave a small scratch on the monster's chest. Desperate, Namdang comments that it feels like he hit a steel armor. The Minotaur is incredibly tough. Lost in his thoughts, the old man doesn't notice an attack coming his way, and when Yu realizes this, he tries to warn him. However, it's already a bit late, and the man narrowly dodges, but the beast grazes him. He quickly jumps back, trying to stay on his feet with his 2 axes in hand, determined not to run from the fight. After taking the hit, the man is no longer in his best condition, and disheartened, he realizes that the monster didn't dodge his attack because it was too weak to do so. As he stares down the Minotaur in front of him, the guild leader thinks that a careless move could lead to his death, so he needs to think more strategically. As part of his plan, he orders all the men inside the barrier to circle around the enemy. He instructs everyone to gather information while avoiding direct attacks, trying to find the monster's weak point. Watching the scene, Yu thinks the guild leader is truly experienced, as he's giving clear and decisive orders even in this situation. Looking at the Minotaur, the boy notices that the beast is emitting a terrifying aura. He then realizes that the monster isn't moving toward its prey, as if the distance doesn't matter, which suggests something strange is happening. When he looks closer, he sees that the beast has raised its hand, holding its axe, and has started emitting lightning. Observing the creature carefully, Yu recognizes that it's the same power Thor used on the day they met. Namvang also notices that the creature is preparing something, so he orders all of his subordinates to charge at the bull. Even with everyone attacking it, the monster remains standing, charging a powerful attack with lightning in its hand. Our protagonist remains still, trying to warn them that it's dangerous, but the guild leader is blinded by the thought that they finally cornered the beast. What actually happened, though, is that he made the worst decision of his life. He realizes the monster's attack is ready, and it's too late to avoid it. He's likely going to die there. But like a true hero, Yu doesn't give up. He quickly jumps and kicks the Minotaur's face, trying to save his comrade. However, even with that strike, the beast seems barely affected, merely turning its head and becoming even more enraged. The Minotaur continues its attack, and this time no one can escape as lightning floods the area, creating a massive flash. An energy sphere hits the ground and explodes, sending everyone in the room flying. Someone outside the barrier, observing the battle, comments that they can't believe what they're seeing. One of the guild members remarks that the captain has fallen, and after the Minotaur slammed its axe into the ground, it's possible Nambound is finished. Everyone tries to find a way to get the people out of there, but the barrier has no openings. On the ground, still trying to pull himself together, Yu thinks that the crazy bull didn't even get a scratch after his greatest effort. Resigned to his fate, he thinks that after living such a miserable life, he hoped to find some peace after gaining a talent, but now it's all going to end in a foolish death. As if a light shines on his face, the boy notices something in front of him, and when he looks closer, he sees something that could save him. Smiling as if he's grasping a glimmer of hope, Ambia thinks that there's one thing he hasn't tried yet, and it might work. Grabbing a sword in front of him and standing up, the boy declares that dying there would definitely ruin his chance for a peaceful rest. Amidst the smoke from its attack, the Minotaur watches as a weakened human rises again. A golden aura begins to envelop Dambiak's body, and he declares that he hasn't endured everything he's been through just to die there. Standing tall, the boy swings his sword through the air, showing that the golden aura is now infusing the weapon. Seeing this, the Minotaur, for some reason, simply stares at the young man. With extreme determination, our protagonist declares that the Minotaur should prepare itself because he won't die without a fight, and then his SS rank sword talent activates. Our protagonist and the Minotaur beast stare each other down face to face. Namyeon, injured, mentions that his axe couldn't even wound the beast, so that sword won't be able to cut it either. The man thinks he wanted to tell Yu to run away, but the words wouldn't come out of his mouth. And seeing the Minotaur charging towards that poor boy, he blames himself for the situation. A quick slash is performed before anyone there could even see it. Everyone inside and outside the barrier is shocked by the scene they witness. After the slash, Dambiak appears behind the Minotaur, and something goes flying. That object flying through the air was the Minotaur's horn, which had been torn off. Yu, determined, thinks that at first it was a gamble, but he could feel it the moment he held the sword. He felt he could really defeat the Minotaur, and after losing his horn, the beast starts to bleed. The young man thinks that even though it was his first time holding a sword, it felt like it was a part of his body. And smiling at that weapon, Yu declares that it was his SS rank talent. The enraged monster, after losing its horn, turns around ready to attack the boy. The beast steps on the ground and immediately charges at its enemy. Damdiok, seeing the monster approaching, stands firm. The Minotaur then, after charging at the boy, tries to grab him with its hands. After the attack, the creature notices that its opponent is no longer there and has even been injured. Once again, Yu moves behind the Minotaur, striking with his sword. Manga, seeing this, can't believe the young man delivered 6 consecutive slashes at that speed. And looking at Yu's fighting stance, he thinks that the boy had been a swordsman all along. But there was something he didn't want to admit, yet it was the reality. Yu continues to face the beast, but shows he is irritated by something. And seeing that his slashes were superficial, the boy gets frustrated. The Minotaur, not used to being confronted like this, goes insane upon realizing it had been challenged. Realizing the slashes had no effect, the snub-nosed one who caused all of this despairs. Namyoung, seeing his subordinate's reaction, comments that Yu's attacks are comparable to the best swordsmen in the East. However, there was a specific problem, and as he says this, he looks at the sword Yu was using. The boy thinks that his weapon was nearly worn out after just a few blows. Our protagonist states that, at this rate, he won't be able to use that weapon for long and must strike the beast's vital point at once. Determined and resolute, without a second thought, the young man charges at the beast. And the monster, seeing it was being attacked head-on, moves to counterattack its opponent. The Minotaur tries to punch the boy, but the boy quickly dodges. Taking advantage of the opening, Yu uses his body movement to kick the Minotaur's arm. However, to his dismay, he realizes the creature didn't even budge. The beast then, looking at its opponent, sees his sword coming toward it. Distracted by the weapon, it doesn't notice an attack coming from below that hits its chin squarely. Then our protagonist delivers a powerful kick to the monster's jaw. After realizing he succeeded, the boy quickly recovers his sword in midair. And right after, he states that he had caught the beast while trying to attack it at that moment. However, being airborne, Yu realizes there's no time to react and the Minotaur counterattacks. The monster uses both hands to slam the ground in the direction where its enemy was. Yu merrily escapes and upon landing, tries to keep his balance. Looking at his weapon, he realizes it was already completely worn out. Dambiok comments that his sword is already at its limit and that his martial arts won't work, so the next blow will be the last. Yu says that if he had at least an opening, everything could work out, and at that moment, the Minotaur begins to do something. Realizing what was happening, the boy breaks into a very happy smile and declares that there was the opening he wanted. Then once again, the monster starts to charge its lightning attack. Seeing this, Namgung is shocked and thinks that this is the technique the monster used before. At this moment, our protagonist does not retreat and stands firm, just waiting for the right moment. The guild leader refuses to believe that Yu would face that blow head-on. And at this point, the auras of the Minotaur and Dambiok collide, creating a powerful light. After getting up, Namgung thinks he must help the boy somehow, and he recalls the moment when you said he could fight without seeing. Thinking of something, he turns to the snub-nosed one who was in a fetal position and calls out to him. The man states that he had something cool in his robe, and that was the blonde boy's last chance to shine. Meanwhile, our protagonist was waiting for the right moment to strike, sword in hand. He stares at his opponent, thinking this would be his last chance, and he had to make it count. Because to end this, he only needed to hit the beast's vital point. The two opponents look at each other for a moment before moving to fight. The Minotaur prepares to launch the lightning attack, and in response, Dambiok leaps toward the beast. He manages to get past the lightning emissions and nearly reaches the side of the monster. The beast was about to launch the attack, so Yu gets close enough to strike it. The young man uses his body movement to try to hit the monster in front of him, and he succeeds, deeply wounding the creature's chest. However, none of that was enough, and at that exact moment, the boy's sword breaks. Stating that there was nowhere left to run because the monster was about to attack, Yu is stunned. Dropping what was left of his weapon on the ground, he thinks it was all over. Then the Minotaur finally completes its attack and moves to unleash it. However, suddenly, another sword comes into Damdiok's hand. Taking advantage of that unique opportunity, the young man declares it's over for the Minotaur. The snub-nosed one, who was previously angry with Damdiok, asks the rookie to get rid of the beast. So Yu uses his sword to pierce the monster's stomach. A crowd gathers outside the portal, just watching. Many people are there, including news stations reporting the events. And then one of the citizens notices some people were coming out of the dungeon. Yu is helping Namgung walk and tells the old man that they were almost at the exit. The young man, intrigued, asks how the boss knew he could catch his sword thrown from behind. Namgung states he didn't know and only remembered when the boy said he could fight without seeing, so he just assumed. Smiling, Yu thinks they survived thanks to the old man, but the man denies it. Along with all the other guild members, they state that the one who saved everyone was our protagonist. The guild leader gives the young man a light slap on the back and asks what he was doing. Then he says that people were waiting for him because the boy was the #1 contributor in that dungeon and should give his testimony. Seeing all this, Dambiak can't believe what is happening and asks if it was really true. Recalling his past, the boy states he was underestimated all of his life for his lack of talent, but he was no longer like that. Smiling with hope without opening his eyes, the boy raises his hand to everyone. And the people there also raise their hands as a sign of respect to the boy. In the hospital in the city zone, some people are waiting for their turn to be seen. Inside, our protagonist is watching from afar as his mother sleeps, thinking that thank God she was okay. Looking to the side, the young man notices his interview for the news is on TV. In the interview, some questions were asked of him that the young man didn't know how to answer since it was his first time. Many journalists tried to ask what it was like inside, but the boy responded timidly. And finally, he stated to everyone that guilds and divisions didn't matter. He just fought with everything he had to protect the people he valued. But with that, more and more questions came up, and seeing that on TV, the young man turns it off, saying it was embarrassing. A notification comes to his smartphone, and looking at it, he sees it was a picture of him fighting monsters. Suddenly, the system materializes in front of him, stating he had gained fame and therefore received divinity. Our protagonist recalls what divinity was, and with that, a new job becomes available. Quickly, the boy states he has to take advantage, and upon opening it, he realizes the job was to be a security guard for Hephaestus' forge. Looking at that, the young man says it didn't seem very complicated and needed to accept. But stretching, he comments that since he had run so much, he wanted to rest first. However, 3 gods were already signing up for that job, and that was the last chance. He gets irritated with that system notification, but thinking it would be easy, accepts the job. In that hospital, a strong light is emitted, and something quickly happens. He was violently transported to another place, and the young man asks if that could have been gentler. Dambiak was in the middle of a palace, and in the center, a star was heating the forge. Sweating, the boy thinks that it was way too hot there and felt like a sauna. The boy states that Hephaestus could at least have an air conditioner there, not realizing the god was right behind him. Hephaestus says it's a pleasure to meet the boy and introduces himself as the owner of the forge. After being startled, the young man bows and introduces himself, and Hephaestus laughs. You wonders if Hephaestus had really heard everything he said. With his large body and smiling, the god states that our protagonist was exactly as the news described. Hephaestus says that the love of the mountain god for humans made him fight, even in Thor's dungeon. Laughing, the being mentions that's why Thor liked the boy, as he had courage, and Yu is relieved that Hephaestus didn't hear. But surprising the boy, Hephaestus reveals that he had heard everything, and Dambiak apologizes. As he turns, the man says that's enough with the introductions and will explain the tasks to the boy. Because only by seeing can one believe, so Hephaestus summons a trumpet in his hand. The deity mentions that the sound might be loud and prepares to blow. A huge boom echoes throughout the place, almost deafening Yu. And after that, some muscular and short people start running. Some dwarves bow before Hephaestus and introduce themselves. Hephaestus introduces the mountain god and says he will work with the dwarves, and the short ones reply that they are at Yu's service. Embarrassed, Dambiak comments that he wasn't used to working in a forge but would do his best. The god of the forge says he doesn't need to be humble since newbies can do well. Hephaestus says that Yu should not underestimate the dwarves because despite being small, they have problematic behaviors, explaining also that some things always disappear when he pays attention to other places. And even the pendant he prepared for Freya disappeared last week. Hearing that, Dambiak can't believe they dared to steal something from a goddess, and Hephaestus says it's very problematic. Staring at the dwarves, our protagonist thinks that the short ones didn't seem like that. Hephaestus states that he has a commitment on Olympus, and even though he thinks it will be easy, he hands a weapon to Yu. Looking at the information on Hercules' club, the boy is impressed. In shock, Dambiak thinks that weapon was way too overpowered. Hephaestus opens a portal and says goodbye, telling the mountain god to take care of the forge. Before Hephaestus leaves, Yu comments that he doesn't know what he should do since the god didn't explain the job. Smiling, the god says Dambiak shouldn't ask since it would be fine if the young man was stronger than the dwarves. Then Hephaestus finally says goodbye and disappears into the portal, and at that moment, Yu remains still. Nervously, the boy turns to the dwarves, saying the introductions are over and asking if they will be good boys. Seeing the dwarves' reaction, our protagonist assumes Hephaestus gave him that club because he knew this would happen. Laughing, the boy asks the dwarves to go easy on him because he just got a cool weapon. Then, after drawing his club, the young man states that the weapon could hurt them. Unexpectedly, all the dwarves draw machine guns and weapons and point them at Yu. The dwarf, who previously seemed kind now, had a commanding posture. With an expression of anger, he says goodbye to the boy and immediately fires a shot. It's possible to see Dambiak waking up slowly, seeing 2 people talking and arguing with each other. The 2 dwarves are discussing an item that looked like a necklace made by Hephaestus. Realizing what happened, the boy sees that those dwarves had stolen the necklace made for Freya. But before he can stop them, the boy notices he is tied to a stone pillar. The dwarves, seeing this, realize the boy woke up faster than expected, so he really was a god. Surprising the 2, the boy states they were very bold. And then he says that the god Hephaestus wouldn't let this mess happen and would punish the dwarves. The short ones seem uneasy, and the boy concludes that this was their last chance to end it. Then the two, who seem scared, start laughing at the whole speech as if they didn't care. One of the dwarves states they wouldn't be scared since they knew the risk from the start. Another dwarf arrives and says the two should collect the valuable goods since the tribe was about to leave. The short one with red hair says he'll just take one last shot at you, not realizing the young man was cutting the ropes. Before knocking Dambiuk out for good, the two start mocking the boy, calling him weak. And when he's about to break the ropes, Yu states they will regret this. Again, the dwarves laugh at him, but at that moment, Dambiuk becomes enraged and breaks the ropes. Pulling out his club, the boy says he had warned them, and seeing this, the dwarves become confused. Our protagonist comments that he had already said they would regret it, so the boy strikes the two short men. After giving them a good massage, Yu ties up the two dwarves. The man states he only used violence because he couldn't let it slide. Yu puts the knife he used back into his sleeve and says he would be at risk if he hadn't asked Nambung for it. He recalls the moment in the dungeon when the girl recommended he always carry a sword and says he will thank that young woman. Looking at the dwarf's hands, he notices that the young man was wearing the necklace meant for Freya. Meanwhile, in another place, the dwarves are collecting some metal bars to finish up. The bald man tells his boss that they have finally gathered all the minerals. And finally, he mentions that they also seized all the armor and weapons, and that the plan was almost complete. A bearded blonde man tells the subordinates to speed up the process because they should leave soon. The dwarf with a Viking look mentions that their boss, Red Fist, has something to say. Then Red Fist begins his speech saying that the dwarf tribe is endowed with the spirit of the Flaming Mountains. They have the best minerals and the bravest warriors in the world. Red Fist, irritated, adds that they work for reward and take great pride in what they do. As the dwarves continue to cry at that speech, the chief says they were not treated with respect, and that the owner of that place, Hephaestus, humiliated them. Today was the day of revenge. Finally, Red Fist raises his hand and says this was revenge against Hephaestus. While sneaking around, Dambiuk thinks those bald guys were all together like a swarm of ants. The boy was wondering what he should do, but accidentally makes a small noise. Everyone excited about the revolution turns and notices the young man, who quickly tries to play it off. However, everyone in the tribe pulls out machine guns and shotguns to put an end to the boy. A barrage of bullets begins heading toward Yu, who barely hides behind a pillar. Crouching down, the young man wonders why dwarves have weapons like that. Our protagonist wonders how anyone could call the dwarves weaklings. Red Fist laughs, a little surprised that the boy managed to escape from prison. He tells one of his lackeys that the dwarves guarding Yu were defeated, and that he should go there. The man is silent for a moment, just smoking his cigar and thinking a bit. Then the dwarf tells the low-class god that from now on, it will leave that place completely empty, adding that they only hate Hephaestus and have nothing against the boy, so he has two options. Either the boy helps the dwarves clear that place and becomes their accomplice, or he goes back where he came from and pretends nothing happened. Finally, the dwarf says it would be wise for you to think carefully and not do something stupid just for a few coins. Our protagonist thinks that if he runs away from that place, his reputation will be ruined. And the boy says he won't be able to do any part-time jobs and that he can't let that happen. In other words, if he lets this happen, he could even be killed by Hephaestus. So his only options were to fight those dwarves or be killed by the Forge God. Crying, Yu admits in his mind that he thought it would be an easy job, but he was wrong. The dwarf is surprised by something when he notices that the boy is surrendering. Dambiuk was walking with his hands up, and at that moment, Red Fist says he made a good decision. Again, the dwarf calls the protagonist a low-class god, which makes the young man uncomfortable. Yu questions why they are going so far for fame, as Hephaestus could find out and not let it go. The boy continues praising the god, stating that he wouldn't let such blasphemy slide easily. Dambiuk says they should fear divine punishment, but something interrupts him. A shot is fired that grazes the side of Yu's face. The bearded blonde man next to Red Fist orders him to shut up and say nothing more about it. Seeing that he almost met his end, Yu begins to tremble. Again, the blonde man points the gun at the boy, stating that he would kill him once and for all, but Red Fist asks him to wait. The dwarf chief gets irritated and questions if the boy really called Hephaestus the great master craftsman. While smoking his cigar, the dwarf says that Yu knows nothing, and that before turning the boy into Sato's food, he will explain a story. With conviction, the dwarf states that Hephaestus' creations are nothing but trash. Hearing that, Yu is astonished, questioning if what the dwarf said was true. Once again, Yu asks the dwarf if that is true, and Red Fist confirms, saying that Hephaestus is a thief. The captain of the dwarves begins to tell the story that one day Hephaestus came to the mountain where their tribe lived and praised their creations. Hephaestus asked if the dwarves wanted to work with him, and then all the short ones became slaves. Our protagonist remains incredulous about these revelations. Red Fist explains that everyone in the tribe worked tirelessly for the god. Angrily, the dwarf says that if it weren't for all those wasted years, all that wealth and honor would belong to the dwarves. The dwarf says that when he understood everything, there was no one left with the spirit to forge, and all that remained for them was a desperate revenge. Laughing, Dambiuk says he understands everything now, and indeed that person was a jerk. A man who wants to ruin everything because he envies the achievements of those superior to him is truly trash. referring to the dwarf chief. Hearing this, Red Fist becomes even angrier and questions if that is all Yu has to say. When all the weapons are pointed in the direction of our protagonist, the boy asks everyone to stop. Dambiak asks all the dwarves to listen to him and understand what he wanted to say. Yu explains that if Red Fist flees, he will be seen as a thief in the eyes of an outsider, and that is a dishonor to him. Seeing that he was being flattered, the dwarf warrior is tempted to listen to what the boy has to say. Dambiak says there's another way for them to take revenge on the gods since the weapon Hephaestus made is in his possession. The boy challenges the dwarves to drop those firearms and compete with real weapons against him. And finally, our protagonist proposes a fight for Red Fist to defeat a warrior who wields a weapon made by Hephaestus and prove himself superior. The blonde dwarf gets irritated and tells Yu that such a cheap trick will not work. Then the short one points his weapon at the boy, saying it wasn't worth it for his chief to listen to that. Thinking his plan had failed, the young man begins to cry, surrendering. However, the chief, who is furious, says that the great Red Fist would never run away. Rolling up his sleeves, the dwarf mentions that Yu talked too much for a low-class god, and the boy realizes his plan worked. Red Fist says he will fight the boy, but he must take responsibility for calling himself a warrior. While picking up his weapon, the dwarf states that they will compete to see who has the stronger weapon. And for the ridiculous talk that the dwarves should run away, the great dwarf will beat the young man to death. The short one, wielding his enormous hammer, quickly charges at Yu. Seeing his plan worked, Dambiak prepares for battle, dodging the first attack. At his side, he notices that the dwarf's attack created a gust of wind that almost hit him. And looking back, he sees that just that gust of wind was enough to crack a stone pillar. That pillar nearly falls on Yu, but he manages to dodge it. Red Fist comments that Dambiak was too naive for underestimating the dwarves. After that, the dwarf again calls our protagonist a lower god. He retorts that he still has a chance, and preparing his weapon, tells the dwarf not to be surprised. The young man, surprising Red Fist, quickly charges at the short one, and with extreme speed, he makes a horizontal slash that the dwarf manages to dodge. Right after, he says it's ridiculous and counterattacks his opponent, driving his hammer into the ground. However, Yu was extremely fast, and after dodging the attack, moves to his opponent's back. Once again, Red Fist tries to hit Yu, but this time the boy dodges, preparing an attack. He lands a direct blow to the dwarf's chest, and Dambiak says it's too early for the short one to be surprised. The tribe, seeing their captain had been hit, becomes worried. Yu realizes that even after attacking, Red Fist still managed to land a kick on his shoulder, and again the dwarf says it's all ridiculous. After making the attack and receiving a counterattack, Dambiak quickly distances himself. The boy says it was his first time taking a kick, and the dwarf was really good. Red Fist says the boy wasn't speaking empty words and was indeed good at fighting. So the dwarf comments that it would be a good idea to test the boy's limits, calling him a swordsman afterward. The dwarf states that he realized as soon as he saw Yu's stance that he was skilled, even with a blunt weapon. And staring at Dambiak, the man says that the boy's sharp sword intent was great enough to give him chills. Red Fist says he couldn't remember the last time his heart pounded with such excitement, and that Yu was very strong. The others in the tribe, even though they refused to believe it, claim that this low-class god was as strong as the chief. Then, after preparing himself, he apologizes for underestimating Dambiak and says he will show his true strength. After throwing his shirt away, the dwarf declares that he will use all his power. Our protagonist does not let himself be shaken and calls the dwarf to fight. The short man quickly charges at the young man, intending to strike him with his huge hammer. Yu, seeing that powerful attack, is extremely surprised. Even with difficulty, the boy manages to block the attack with his club. He then dodges the dwarf's attack and in doing so gets behind his opponent. Dambiak manages to hit him, but Red Fist quickly moves to counterattack. A fierce battle between Yu and the dwarf continues, and both appear to be thrilled. The tribe, watching the entire battle, is surprised and starts to admire it all. The dwarf chief's subordinates think that it all seems very familiar. And while watching our protagonist and their chief fight, the dwarves state that it sounded like the noise of a forge. Everyone gets emotional with that fight, as that sound brings back forgotten memories. They feel as if Dambiak's fiery hammer was striking their souls. Amidst the fight, observing Yu, the dwarf declares that he had the soul of a blacksmith and recalls the things the boy said. The man thinks he couldn't refute it because instead of blaming himself for being incompetent, it was easier to blame someone else since the day he received Hephaestus' proposal. The strong emotions they had surfaced and filled his heart. But after forging so many weapons, he constantly remembered his inadequacies. It was a pathetic story, and everything that happened afterward was a waste of time. Then, as a counterattack, Dambiak knocks the dwarf's hammer far away. And while crying, watching the low-class god attacking, he admits he lost badly. When he sees that Yu was about to deliver the final blow, the dwarf simply accepts his defeat. However, a hand immediately stops the blow that was happening. Hephaestus suddenly arrives in the room, ordering Yu to stop right where he was. Then the god states that he was only away for a while, but the place was a mess. With an imposing aura, the man states that he would like to hear all the details of what happened there. Hephaestus states that he knew our protagonist had fighting skills, but the boy made a huge mess. And analyzing the situation, he says it's over because he has something more important to worry about. Finally, looking at the minerals that were there, the god says he wants an explanation about that. Intimidating Red Fist, the god says he needs to hear a good explanation. The dwarf bows and explains that he did it all alone and that his tribe had nothing to do with it. All the other dwarves become outraged seeing their chief lying to protect them. Hephaestus asks why his subordinate did that, and the dwarf begins to think. Remembering everything he had experienced, Red Fist thinks that the people of his tribe did nothing and only trusted an incompetent captain. Then the dwarf decides he would surrender for the sake of his friends, but Yu interrupts him. The boy apologizes for the mess and explains that he ordered Red Fist to do it. Before the dwarf chief could question him, Dambiak ignores him and claims he was the mastermind behind it. Hephaestus tries to understand the whole situation since he trusted the boy to protect that forge and asks for an explanation. The young man tries to think of a lie and remembers the necklace that was meant for Freya. Yu thinks quickly and tells the god to look at that object, revealing the necklace shortly after. Hephaestus is happy that he found it, and the boy replies that he remembered it was missing. Looking at it, Red Fist remembers that the necklace was what he gave his subordinates to take care of, and he starts to think that if Yu says he found it with the dwarves, the situation would be bad for everyone. Our protagonist lies, claiming that the one who found the necklace was the dwarf captain, and explains that he asked the chief to take the items from the warehouse and have a look. Hephaestus questions if that was true with an intimidating look that even makes you sweat. The god of craftsmanship assumes it was and starts laughing, thanking Dambia for taking care of everything. Yu responds that he feels flattered while sighing in relief that his plan worked. Then Hephaestus puts his hand on the boy's shoulder and comments that he was a good guy. Hephaestus mentions that he understands why Thor liked the young man since he was fearless. While holding the dwarf's hammer, the god prepares to give a speech. Hephaestus says he was worried, thinking the dwarves were losing motivation and neglecting their smithing work. But he was wrong, as the sound of that hammer colliding with Hercules' club could be heard all the way to Mount Olympus. The craftsman god proceeds to return the weapon to the blacksmith. He then states that the hammer has become a better weapon than before, indirectly referring to the dwarf. Finally, he comments that he is looking forward to Red Fist Creations, who feels happy about that. Hephaestus tells the dwarves they should keep up the good work together, and thus the whole tribe regrets what they did. The god then calls Yu, and the boy responds promptly. Hephaestus places his hand in a portal, saying he made a great decision in trusting Damdiak because he did a great job and even helped find the missing necklace. From the portal, he pulls out a beautiful box and presents it to our protagonist, commenting that it was a small token of gratitude. Yu is drooling and thinks he thought he would receive the club as a reward, but he got something much better. The boy says it's rude to say no and will gladly accept it as he opens the box. For some reason, he looks disappointed, and upon looking, he sees a monster inside the box. Hephaestus calls him an idiot and asks the young man to look closer. Yu seems unimpressed, saying that even though it's a very cute baby fox, a pet monster for him feels a bit strange. The craftsman god takes the animal and asks if the boy is refusing the gift. Immediately afterward, he recites some runes to the animal, which quickly transforms into a beautiful white and gold sword. Wielding that weapon, the blacksmith god says it's a shame the boy doesn't need it. Embarrassed and regretful, Dambiak asks how Hephaestus managed to turn that fox into a sword. The craftsman explains that it was not just a sword, smiling right after. He states that it doesn't matter if it's a sword or a spear. That is the essence of weapons that can transform into any weapon in the universe. In other words, that fox was very precious and a divine treasure. Smiling, the god comments that it's a shame the young man didn't want that gift. And since you didn't want that treasure, he would give the beast to the dwarves. Pretending to be clueless, Yu says he could not refuse a gift granted by Lord Hephaestus, and explains that he only refused out of politeness, but decided to accept it back because of that. The boy promptly goes to the animal and says he will take good care of the fox. Gazing at that beautiful beast, the young man feels a bit shy, saying it was very cute. So because it was white and fluffy, from that day on, the fox's name would be Baxor. The animal starts licking our protagonist, and the young man becomes extremely happy, realizing it liked the name. Hephaestus places his hand over the beast and begins to recite a spell to transfer the ownership of the mood fox to Yu. The animal, after the spell, goes to its new owner's shoulder, and Dambiak asks if it worked. Hearing this, the craftsman responds that it did, and that now the animal belongs to the boy, and Hephaestus also says he will give a few more gifts to Yu. Right after that, the god says he has work to do and will part ways with the boy there. With all the gifts he had received, the young man thanks him and asks Hephaestus to take care. Finally, behind the young man, the dwarf appears, thanking him for not leaving yet. Red Fist asks why Yu lied to help the dwarves, as they were disposable trash. Dambiak retorts that he knew how it was because he found his old self similar to the dwarves. Red Fist tries to offer something, but the boy says he doesn't want anything. And before crossing the portal to return home, our protagonist comments that they survived together by helping each other. Before leaving, Dambiak explains that Lord Hephaestus possibly understood from the beginning what happened and just let it slide. Right after, he says goodbye to the dwarven tribe, asking for permission. Red Fist comments that in the name of their tribe, the boy had their gratitude, bowing afterward. Watching the young man leave, he comments that he hopes to repay the boy's help someday. Remembering Mr. Hephaestus, the dwarf starts telling the other dwarves that they would be working all night. A beautiful, brightly lit city can be seen. As he approaches a certain place, you thinks that this was the moment he had been waiting for. It was the hunter's department store, and the boy states that they would make some money there. Jiba is a 37-year-old man who has worked in the hunter's industry since he was young and became the general manager of the largest hunter's store in the country last week. The man is drinking wine while looking at the view from his balcony. He thinks that since he has earned the best place in the country, he should put his past behind him and start living like an elegant man. Acting with extreme elegance, the man says that with the position he has earned, he will start living elegantly alongside other nobles. He thinks that since the position makes the man, he should be treated with elegance. Returning to reality, someone can be seen calling him, and Jiba was irritated by something. The man thinks that his store was meant to be only for special people, but when he looks at Dambyuk, Ba claims that the boy looked like a beggar. She starts analyzing the young man, trying to determine if he was a hunter. But apparently you had no weapon or armor on his body. He is possibly just some idiot who thinks he's a hunter simply because he picked up junk from an empty dungeon. Arrogantly, he attends to the boy and says he would guide him. Shortly afterward, as they walk, the man explains to Dambyuk that this is the evaluation center, and sighing, certain that nothing the boy brought would be useful, Ba introduces our protagonist to an elder. The elder states that he will check the things the young man brought and soon searches through the bag of items. After examining all the items, the elder becomes extremely shocked. He asks you where the boy had gotten those things, and the boy said he only got those random items from someone he knew. Chiba gets irritated, seeing the boy's audacity, and then says he was right, that the young man shouldn't dare to come to that store with cheap items. The snob goes to the elder who did the evaluation and asks him to quickly dismiss that beggar. Seriously, the elder comments that he has been working there for 40 years, but that was the first time he had discarded items as random things. Since everything you brought was at least 4-star equipment, Ba is extremely shocked to hear that, stating that it was impossible. He begins to wonder how a guy like that boy got so much high-quality equipment. Completely changing his demeanor to please Dambyuk, the man says he will take the boy to the VIP room. Inside, the elder who evaluated the items mentions that if the boy sold everything, he could get approximately 3 billion won. For a moment, our protagonist hears it as 3 million, but after understanding, he is shocked. He was amazed that a bunch of equipment that Hephaestus called failures was worth 3 billion. The boy gets extremely excited, and the appraiser explains that he could even double the price depending on the buyer. Jiba thinks that the highest quality equipment that can be sold at any price was right in front of him. Even if he had to act like a sycophant, he had to get the rights to sell it no matter what. He goes to try to convince you to sell the items, but immediately our protagonist replies that he wants to sell everything. Ba doesn't understand, and once again, Dambyuk repeats that he would sell all those items. The man starts thinking that you must be an angel sent from the heavens, and that he could even be promoted again because of this. However, the boy cuts Ba's vibe, stating that he wouldn't sell there since he didn't like the way he was treated, and Jiba was the first person to lose a high position within a week. The young man heads to another place and quickly manages to sell all the items, and the people there thank him. With the check he received in his hands, he starts wondering if this was some kind of dream. Crying, the boy couldn't even believe that he had money in his bank account because he couldn't even count how many zeros there were. He comments that he really realized he was too dirty from walking around all day. Looking at a clothing store window, the boy finds something that interests him. Smiling, Dambyuk thinks that because he worked so hard, he could treat himself to something, and then he would visit his mother the next day. The next day, in the room where Yu's mother was, the woman is impressed by something. The woman comments that it's been a while since her son last visited, and then she asks what all those gifts you brought were. The hospital maid of our protagonist's mother says that the woman should watch TV sometimes, and right after turning on the television, it shows an interview where Yu is being admired for defeating a dungeon. The other lady also explains that Dambyuk completed the dungeon with the talent he had, and the boy becomes embarrassed. After hearing that, Yu's mother is in disbelief that the young man had a talent. Yu begins to explain that he had recently acquired it. Our protagonist starts to say that he got it all of a sudden. But before he could continue, his mother slaps her hands on the table and gets worried about that. However, she reveals that she was just happy and crying with joy for her son. Dambyuk tries to calm the woman, asking why she was crying, but the only response he gets is that it was so wonderful. Looking at that scene, the boy thinks his mother always blamed herself for him not having a talent. At that moment, an interview is happening on the news, and the interviewee is the hunter Nambon. The man is asked about our protagonist, and he responds that the boy was an excellent hunter. Yu's mother can't believe that the famous man is talking about her boy, and seeing this, Dambyuk becomes extremely shy. However, the boy thinks that this could be a chance because when he gains fame, he receives more divinity, which means getting more part-time jobs. Because of this, he had already chosen some great part-time jobs. One of them was about exterminating the lost spirit on Eden Hill, and the reward was a golden apple responsible for the god's immortality. Dambyuk thinks that this apple could even cure his mother's cancer, and looking at the woman, he becomes determined. However, suddenly, the journalist conducting the interview states there is breaking news. The presenter explains that a portal has just opened in Yongin, Gyeonggi-do, and people have been ordered to evacuate the area immediately. With the energy emitted by the portal, for some reason, our protagonist's pet becomes frightened, hiding in his coat. The boy tries to ask what happened, but the poor animal can only tremble. As he brings his hand closer to the fox, Yu has a vision of a huge eye approaching planet Earth. With that vision, the young man falls silent for a moment, trying to process what he saw. Desperate, he tries to figure out what that was while feeling nervous, not knowing why. The news continues to report that the association has gathered some guilds because this portal is different from other dungeons and does not allow human entry. Our protagonist connects the illusion he had with that portal and tells his mother he must go even though the woman is reluctant about it. From that wormhole, which resembled an eye, several strange goblins start coming out. Nearby, an army of soldiers states that this is the third wave and everyone should prepare. At the top of a mountain, a foot steps in, beginning to analyze the entire area. Yu, wearing new clothes, thinks that this was the new portal while watching the soldiers fight the monsters. Confident, the young man tells his fox that they should go now. After a massacre against the beasts, one of the soldiers asks if the third round is over. One of the leaders says they should take a break before the next wave arrives as the reporters are right there, and they should make a good impression. However, a rookie soldier hears some strange noises and looking up at a mountain, he sees something. He notices that on top of the mountain, there was a civilian watching the situation. But being far from that unknown person, the soldier does not recognize who it is. The soldier runs to his superior, calling him. Seeing his subordinate leave the formation, the bald man gets irritated and scolds him. Then the poor rookie explains that his chief should look up there as something was wrong. When the man looks, he sees what it is, and the rookie soldier explains that the civilian was suddenly spotted. Understanding the situation, the boy's leader can't believe a civilian managed to get into a restricted area. Even more irritated, he grabs his subordinate's chin, asking what he was doing. Immediately, he orders his vassal to go after that person, and at this moment, the reporters start noticing the situation. They begin to form theories, as the leader of that team seemed competent but couldn't even control a civilian's entry into a restricted area. Because of this, the reporters decide to create a story, suggesting the bald man might have gotten that position unjustly. Seeing this, the chief quickly becomes irritated and decides to resolve the matter with his own hands. Angry because his comrades entered the dungeon and he was left there alone, the man decides what he's going to do. And in order to earn a promotion, the man quickly activates his wind ability and starts climbing the hill. Shortly after a few jumps, he leaps toward our protagonist, who just watches the man. Yu is impressed, trying to understand what that person was doing. The chief of the soldiers doesn't know why he is doing this himself and regrets it, but since he is there, he decides to make the most of it. He orders Dambiak to leave immediately because it is a restricted area. The man continues and starts mocking Yu, who just listens silently. Arrogantly, the soldier thinks that Dambiak isn't responding because he can't even think straight after seeing a 3-star hunter. Then the bald man starts saying that he understands the boy's nervousness and that if he wants an autograph or interview, he could do it later, but he just needs to give him some time. Mocking the soldier, Dambiak says he doesn't even know who he is, let alone if he's famous, and ignores the man. However, the man doesn't accept being challenged and grabs our protagonist by the shoulder, ordering him to stop. Then, with veins bulging on his face, he asks if the boy just ignored him. Yu's fox starts to get irritated, but Dambiak doesn't care and asks what he is doing, showing he is unaffected by the hunter's strength. The soldier starts mocking the boy even more, saying that this random guy is underestimating him just because he has a weak little pet. Continuing his spectacle, the soldier adds that Yu must be a weak hunter trying to become famous. Then the bald man concludes that for Yu to learn his place, he should reflect after getting beaten up, and he begins to prepare a punch. Immediately, the soldier tries to attack the boy, who manages to dodge just by moving his head. Then Dambiak manages to place his foot in front of the soldier, causing the bald man to lose his balance. Looking down, the man almost falls off the cliff, but is saved by Yu, who grabs him. He manages to help the bald man regain his balance and not fall to his death. Laughing, Dambiak apologizes, saying he didn't mean to do that, but also mentions that a 3-star hunter can't just go around wanting to beat people up. The soldier does not let himself be shaken and continues trying to intimidate the boy, saying he's out of his mind. Once again, the bald man tries to hit Dambiak with a punch, but the boy skillfully dodges. He moves behind the soldier and says it's okay for him to continue, but asks if the man still wants to go on with it. Since there were many people watching at that moment, you could see reporters witnessing the fight. The soldier realizes that Dambiak did this on purpose, becoming even more furious. The reporters then recognize that the boy is the young man who completed the labyrinth dungeon, Yu Dambiak. After hearing this, the bald man is impressed that it is really Yu, who became very famous after his feat. Our protagonist tells his fox that they finally got the attention they wanted, and at that moment, the chief soldier is still in disbelief. Yu raises his hands, asking the reporters to take good pictures since they will hear good news soon. And right after, Dambiak starts repeating all the phrases that his bald opponent had said against him. The man, embarrassed for not knowing that the boy was strong, says nothing, but Dambiak tells him to open his eyes and see what a nobody can do. Then the young man jumps into the black hole, causing the reporters and soldiers to be in shock. As he falls toward the portal, Yu begins to feel a dark energy passing through his body. After entering, a wave of energy is emitted, causing the soldiers to become frightened. Inside, the young man starts to wonder why that portal doesn't allow humans to enter, unlike normal dungeons. And he even recalls that Thor said dungeons were meant to test humans, so this was contradictory. Inside, the boy says he will look around first but ends up bumping into a wall. Seeing a red barrier in front of him, our protagonist begins to wonder what it is. And when he tries to cross it, the system informs him that he doesn't have enough divinity and can't pass because the Eye of the Abyss is watching him. Yu continues trying every method to cross it, but several times the system notifies him of the same thing and prevents him. The boy then starts to wonder why he couldn't even leave there if he didn't have divinity. Already knowing what was going to happen, he says there's no other choice. So as he stands up, Dambiak states that he has only one goal. As he approaches something mysterious, the fox starts to get scared, and seeing this, Yu asked it to stay calm. Dambiak looks into a cave nearby and thinks he saw it as soon as he entered the portal, but didn't want to go in. Observing the darkness emanating from the entrance, the young man states that he at least wanted to see the face of the owner of that portal. You can hear some noises inside the cave, and Dambiak is extremely out of breath. After defeating several goblins, he asks why there were so many of those monsters there. While finishing off one of the beasts, Yu says he thought this would end if he killed the boss, but the boss still hasn't shown up. There were also some differences compared to normal dungeons, as the monsters in the others are programmed to fight just like robots. But while watching a goblin flee, Yu states that these monsters seem to have consciousness. He says his divinity will definitely increase since he managed to enter the portal, and there will be many reporters to interview him. During a walk through the place, the young man doesn't notice a huge goblin about to attack. When he senses the presence of the goblin, the monster tries to strike him and Yu dodges. He is pleased because there was nothing to worry about since finally the boss of that place had arrived. Observing that creature, the boy realizes that this guy seemed a bit weird. However, before he could think about it, the goblin beast charges to strike him again. Our protagonist notices something strange and that the goblin beast is very slow. After dodging another extremely slow blow from the goblin, the boy finds it odd. He jumps on top of the beast's sword and questions whether that monster was really the boss of this place. He breaks the goblin's sword and then states that the monster is too weak. The creature looks somewhat confused, staring at its weapon and trying to understand what happened. However, before it could think too much, Dambiak asks his fox to turn into a sword and quickly grabs it. With extreme agility, the young man slashes the goblin's chest deeply. After the strike, the creature falls to the ground while Dambiak just watches. He is extremely confused, not understanding if it was really over that easily. Yu thinks there is no completion message, which means no one will believe he completed the portal like this. So the boy states that he should extract the monster's core to have at least some proof that he completed it. He starts cutting various parts of the goblin's body while stating that YouTube taught him how core extraction works. After several incisions, the boy finally finds what he was looking for. Dambiak doesn't understand why the object is black since it is said that core colors are usually similar to bright crystals. And analyzing that strange thing, the boy notices it is moving. The black core slips from Yu's hand and starts crawling on the ground like a creature. Dambiak doesn't understand what it is and wonders if he extracted the wrong thing. After piercing that living creature, a notification appears stating that the portal core has been collected and the portal will permanently disappear soon. Outside, several cracks are already forming on the ground due to the energy emitted by the portal. The police try to calm the citizens since, because one person entered the portal, a crowd has formed. The soldier who confronted Dambiak is trying to explain how our protagonist managed to enter the portal. A doctor is next to her assistant, saying they should stop the citizens because the world will fall into chaos if that information leaks. There will be many criticisms against the academy because of this. The woman says that from dungeon investigators that will appear to the top leaders of the Hunters Union, everyone will want to know about it. And if anything else happens, but interrupting the woman, Dambiak starts coming out of the portal. As he exits, he thinks that, as expected, there were really many people waiting for him outside. Many questions start coming his way, trying to understand how the young man got in there, but he first asks them to let him out. The doctor, who was previously worried, thinks the boy is coming out of the portal as if he were jumping out of a trampoline. Out there, he thinks the air is very fresh and feels extremely happy. All the reporters around try to interview the boy with various questions about what the place was like. However, snapping his fingers, Dambiak asks everyone to stop because there is something more important. This important thing was that from that day on, humanity could close all the portals. The journalists become even more confused since entering a portal is already considered a miracle, and closing them was quite impossible. Yu pulls out a black slime from his pocket and states that it is the core extracted from the boss. Throwing that core into the air, the boy says he will show everyone something interesting, leaving people astonished. He takes advantage of the object being in the air and uses his sword to slice through that black core. Then the portal, which resembled an eye, starts to shatter as if it were made of glass. After that, the portal explodes, creating a massive gust of wind that blows Dambiek's hair back. All the people and the crowd present are in shock, unable to believe that the portal disappeared. And the doctor, who had been worried before, says that she thought she had seen it all while experimenting with portals her entire life. But that scene was extremely peculiar as she watches the shards of the portal in the air. She asks Dambiek who the young man was, and the boy remains silent. Yu thinks he was waiting for that question and loudly states his name. With his sword in hand and with extreme grandeur to gain more divinity, the boy reveals his name to everyone present, a mysterious hunter who went through the portal. This news spread throughout the world, and the name Yu Dambiek became popularized across all regions of the country. With those newspaper posts, various comments began to emerge, both positive and negative, about our protagonist. With this, the boy began to receive divinity en masse, and several notifications alerting him appeared. After gaining so much divinity, he receives a promotion to be a low-class god, and upon seeing this, the young man tries to read the notification. Suddenly, a microphone comes close to his face, and the boy is startled. Several journalists start interviewing the boy, who is suffocating while trying to read that important notification. Amid the crowd, a person with beautiful legs starts stepping out of a luxurious car. A girl wearing a skirt states that they have finally found what they were looking for. Pushing through the crowd, several bodyguards begin piercing their way to reach the center of that mass of people. A woman tries to ask where the girl is going with her subordinates, but is ignored. When the woman recognizes who that person is, she starts shouting for everyone to hear. While giving an interview, a female voice interrupts Dambiek, calling out to him. The girl you met that day in the dungeon says that the guild master wants to see the boy. Seeing that familiar appearance, the boy is extremely shocked, just observing that beautiful young woman but without recognizing her. And with authority, she says that for now, you will have to come with her. And that was Jun So-yul, the 7-star hunter and future master of the Sangyun Guild. Yu arrives at the building where the Sangyun Guild is located, and after that, he heads to the place to wait for Namgun. The young man remembers the moment when the bodyguard who escorted him said that the owner could not attend because he went to a dungeon, and Yu gets irritated by this. Sitting on the couch, the boy assumes he was called in a hurry because the guild probably wanted to hire him. Until that moment, it still hadn't sunk in that someone of Jun So-yul's stature had come to him. Dambiek explains that this girl rose to the position of youngest guild leader on her own and is one of the 3 7-star hunters in the country. Even in the era of hunters dominated by all kinds of people, she is recognized worldwide. Dambiek thinks that the only person capable of pulling him out of that crowd of interviewers would be someone like Jun So-yul. He thinks that this was good because he needed some time to check on a little something. Then he activates the part-time job window and the system materializes in front of him. The system informs him that as a low-class god, new abilities have been unlocked, such as the power symbols and title system. Dambiek thinks the titles are amazing and remembers that Thor's was god of thunder, so Yu states he needed a good one. Confirming that he wanted to access the title system, the boy is extremely impressed. However, seeing that there were only ridiculous names, he wonders what kind of divine names those are. There was even one called God of Fly Swatting, which was extremely ridiculous. He states he would find a really cool one and begins to search through them. However, something catches the boy's attention, bringing a memory to the surface. Yu comments that thinking about it, at no point did he mention Baxter's name, and yet Jun seemed to know the animal's name. Outside that place, the girl is leaving, walking slowly. For some reason, the girl gives a small smile of happiness. Writing on his new cell phone, he starts searching how to deal with a stalker. The young man doesn't know what to do about Jun So-yul since even though she seems like a normal person, she is a stalker. A notification on our protagonist's system starts appearing and disturbing him repeatedly. He asks the system what it is and is informed that his job search announcement has been modified. The young man can't resist and finally clicks on the notification and a new screen appears. Hades, the god of the underworld, was recruiting him to feed Cerberus for 3 days. Seeing that the payment for this job would be double, he wasn't going to worry about that stalker girl. He states that he has to go, even if he has to starve, and promptly accepts the job. Elsewhere, a forest is lit by moonlight. A green light passes by, scaring all the birds there and carrying something. After being thrown somewhere, Dambiek thinks he is starting to get used to it. However, a bright light suddenly appears, leaving the young man temporarily blinded. Asking himself who was shining a flashlight in his eyes, he sees a strange and frightening creature in front of him. Seeing that being, Yu panics and lets out a scream. Looking ahead, the boy realizes he is on a boat, and in front of him, that creature is watching him. He starts looking around to figure out what is happening. And the creature finally speaks a word stating that the young man is not dead. The monster explains that this is the river Styx, the place where the dead from the underworld are taken. It's also a place that the living cannot easily cross. Upon hearing about the river Styx, the boy remembers that according to myth, that guy should be Charon the ferryman. Yu explains to Charon that he has work to do and asks if the ferryman could help him. The monster then tells Dambiek to go away, irritating the boy. Ignoring the being, Yu asks where he could find Hades, and the ferryman becomes extremely irritated at the boy for calling the god of the underworld like that. Dambyuk starts mocking, saying he'll call him Hades since that's his only name. Charon gets furious, asking if the boy values his life, but our protagonist doesn't care about the intimidation. Charon loses his patience and says he has already warned him to leave. The being draws a huge scythe and again asks the young man to leave. He explains that many low-class and hot-headed gods like him have died pierced by that scythe. However, he wasn't shaken, so for the last time, Charon states that the young man should leave. Our protagonist just shows his finger and mocks that creature. The ferryman gives up trying to convince the boy and then prepares his scythe to strike him. Charon states that Dambyuk will die after saying that he moves to attack the boy. Yu appears shocked seeing the blade approaching, but when it is about to hit him, he smiles. With ease, our protagonist manages to dodge the blow and immediately calls Baksor. The monster doesn't give up and quickly comments that the young man should die right there. With the weapon his pet had transformed into, the boy isn't shaken and counterattacks. Hitting the scythe the ferryman was using, he breaks the blade in two. Charon, frightened, doesn't understand what happened and asks how our protagonist was wielding that weapon. The weapon of Fox transformed into his Hercules club, and hearing this, our protagonist asks how Charon knew about the owner of that club. The ferryman says he remembers because that is Hercules' club, and he was the damned human who defeated him and crossed the river Styx alive without even paying. But before he could continue his story, Dambyuk hits him on the head. Yu states that Charon talks too much, so the monster asks that at least the boy pay to cross the river. However, upon seeing Dambyuk making a scary face, Charon asks the boy to sit down and that they should hurry up. After a beautiful boat trip illuminated by the moonlight, they arrive at their destination. Dambyuk thanks him for the ride and gets ready to get off the boat. But before he could leave, Charon quickly summons his spear again. Saying that the foolish boy would die for letting his guard down in the underworld, the man moves to attack our protagonist. Behind him, the boy had no idea an attack was coming his way until his power activated. After his intuition activates automatically, he quickly dodges to the side, not understanding what happened. Charon doesn't know how you dodged, and seeing this, the monster is shocked. Dambyuk thinks that this intuition power made his body move faster than his thoughts. Annoyed, the boy turns around, saying he would have to beat up the ferryman for that betrayal. And after a long massage, the young man finally gets off the boat, saying he wasted too much time. Someone calls out to our protagonist and asks if he is the person who will take care of Cerberus. A beautiful blonde girl asks if he is the part-time worker. The lovely girl is Persephone, the goddess of flowers and queen of the underworld. She says it's a pleasure to meet Dambyuk since Hades was angry that no one applied for that job. The young man, impressed by the girl, introduces himself back while feeling shy. Persephone, with all her beauty, says she will guide the boy and then starts to turn around. After a long walk, the girl states that the place where Cerberus stays is quite far. Persephone explains that in the past, they kept Cerberus right at the front, but Hades ordered them not to do that anymore. The goddess informs him that most of the part-time workers ran away after seeing that monster, so the worker first had to deal with Charon to pass. Dambyuk understands since Cerberus in mythology is a terrifying monster known as the guardian of the underworld. Determined, Yu thinks he doesn't need to worry since he is the great god of the sword, and even if it is a scary monster, in the end it's just a dog. Persephone says they have finally arrived and the dog is right in front of him. Looking ahead, our protagonist sees a huge three-headed creature chained to a tree. The monster, with its stance, quickly starts to sniff our protagonist's scent. Dambyuk, who is so determined, just thinks he's doomed and that this is the end of his life. Our protagonist practically accepts his death, but his moment of peace is interrupted when the goddess asks if he is okay, and the young man replies that he is. The girl takes out a piece of paper and explains that this is a small precaution personally written by Hades, and so Dambyuk needs to read it. Taking the scroll, he thinks that Hades wouldn't have thrown him to that monster without some preparation. So when he opens it, he thinks the god really had thought of everything and was at least somewhat decent. However, when he reads it, the boy realizes that the dog is a monstrous beast that would devour everything in front of it. After that, the boy throws the paper on the ground, stating that Hades is sending him to his death, and Persephone also says that the daily schedule is written on the back of the paper. When Yu reads the schedule and sees that besides feeding, he also has to walk the monster, he goes crazy. He gets completely irritated, tearing up the paper and asking Hades to stop this because there's no way he can take such a large animal for a walk. Noticing the boy's frustration, the goddess responds that there is no turning back and explains that the last worker who was caught by Hades trying to escape was dragged to hell. The girl says that this worker had all his limbs ripped off and went through something so terrible she couldn't talk more about it. Realizing he has gotten into something extremely dangerous, Dambyuk quickly starts to fix the paper. After patching the scroll with tape, Yu states he made a mistake and asks the goddess where he should start. Persephone shows some nymphs taking meat to the storage, and Yu asks if he should help them. After carrying a few pieces of meat, he asks what he should do with them, and Persephone congratulates him on his work. The goddess explains that he should throw the pieces one at a time to Cerberus. The monster, seeing the food, looks completely different from before and starts drooling. Yu says that Cerberus was growling until a moment ago, but practically turned into a normal dog at the sight of food. While shaking the meat, Dambiak asks the dogs if they want to eat. The young man states that doing this reminds him of the time he worked part-time at a pet cafe and that even big animals have their own cuteness and traits. Looking at the dog, he says that if you take a good look, the monster even seems kind of cute. Foolishly, Dambiak tries to make the huge creature sit. However, in response, Cerberus uses its paw to throw sand at you. All the monster's heads start laughing at our protagonist, and even Persephone can't help but laugh too. Looking at Dambiak covered in dirt, the goddess says the boy is really interesting. Persephone informs him that there's no point in ordering Cerberus around since the dog only listens to Hades, and you understands why no one wanted to take this job. Irritated, he says that if it's going to be like this, he doesn't care anymore. Then immediately afterward, he throws the meat towards Cerberus. The food quickly hits the middle head of the animal. The other two heads start laughing, and our protagonist thinks he failed to control this power. He also states that they shouldn't laugh at their own friends and then hits the remaining two heads with meat as well. The monster becomes extremely irritated by this and tries to charge at you. Our protagonist, seeing the creature approaching, stands firm, just staring it down. Cerberus tries to intimidate our protagonist with his immense size. However, before it could get any closer, is stopped by the chain it was tied to. Dambiak begins to laugh and mock the animal since it couldn't do anything because it was restrained. However, after using so much force, the monster begins to break the chain in two. After that, it finally manages to free itself, and seeing this, Yu falls back in fear. He tries to understand how that animal simply broke that iron collar. However, before he could think about it, he is quickly attacked and forced to dodge to the side. Persephone, analyzing the situation, couldn't believe the chain had a chance to break. He grabs the blonde's hand and says they should run, so Cerberus begins to chase them both. The woman sees that our protagonist is injured on the arm, and he replies that he is fine and that it was just a scratch. Before that, he wanted to know how that chain could break so easily, but Persephone says it's the first time she's seen it happen. The woman mentions that they shouldn't run and that Dambiak should stay by her side. Our protagonist asks why, and the woman explains that she may look human, but she is the wife of the king of the underworld, and Cerberus wouldn't do anything with her there. However, the dog unfortunately doesn't seem to care and goes to bite you. When Persephone is about to be hit by a bite, the boy pushes the goddess to the side and asks Baxter to become a weapon. The fox transforms again into Hercules' club, and Dambiak jumps up. He goes towards Cerberus' central head to attack it. Then he uses all of his strength, spinning his body and hitting one of the dog's heads with full force. However, the animal seems unaffected and quickly attacks the boy with its paw. It throws the young man far away, making him crash to the ground, completely wounded. Exhausted and battered, you can't believe why that dog is so strong. And furiously, Cerberus begins to slowly approach his victim. Persephone panics, begging Yu to move from where he is. She tries to warn him that he was close to the river Styx, and not realizing it because he was dazed, Dambiak doesn't see some hands trying to pull him back. The goddess notices that because of the blow he took, Yu wasn't hearing. She tries to calm the dog, ordering it to stop immediately, but the irritated animal doesn't listen and charges at its victim. Seeing the monster approaching, Yu thinks that he went to feed the dog, but is going to end up becoming food. Angry, the boy states that he won't let that happen. Immediately after, the young man throws himself into the river Styx, stating that he refuses to die that way. Persephone is in shock, seeing our protagonist fall into that lake full of hands pulling him in. The chapter begins with Dambiak sinking into the river Styx, thinking about how cold it was there. As he descends into the depths of the river, a young man refuses to believe he is really dying. He feels like he is floating in a dream, and Yu begins to recall everything that happened to him up to this point. The boy remembers all the jobs he has done and sadly wonders if his whole life has been a mere illusion. Almost passing out, he states that there were many things he wanted from the god's shop, but couldn't even afford to buy anything there. The young man also feels as if his memories are fading away with his body, and he is just experiencing some flashbacks before dying. As he looks up, almost fainting, Dambiak notices that Baxore has entered the river and is coming toward him. Smiling, the boy asks his pet to go away since at least it should live. However, looking at his owner, the fox refuses to leave the boy there. Baxore goes to his owner's face and holds on to him, and brutally he bites Yu's nose, making the boy scream in pain. Snapping back to reality because of the pain from the bite, the boy panics. Yu wakes up to life and looking back, sees several hands pulling him to the bottom of the river. He wonders what those are, and one of the hands tries to drown him. Dambiak immediately notices that with that attack, his consciousness began to fade. And looking at his little pet, who was desperate, the young man thinks he needs to do something. He recalls the moment he fought against Red Fist and the hammer skill he gained after the battle. Baxore then begins to materialize into a weapon and moves to Dambiak's hand. After the fox turns into the same hammer Red Fist used in the fight, Yu prepares to attack those hands. He activates his rank B skill and immediately prepares a strong blow. Then the boy strikes a powerful hit against all those strange hands. After they retreat, the young man moves back a bit, coming back to his senses. However, he realizes that he can't breathe and his oxygen is almost running out. The boy and the fox start frantically swimming upward. At this moment, from outside the river, a few bubbles can be seen appearing. Finally, after a few seconds, Dambiuk emerges from the water. Fighting for his life, the boy quickly swims and grabs onto solid ground. Upon reaching the ground, the boy begins to stand up but notices something in front of him. Standing before you is Cerberus, who quickly tries to attack our protagonist. Seeing this, you becomes extremely scared and can't react. Coldly, Cerberus bites Dambiuk. With the bite, the boy starts screaming in despair. However, he realizes he isn't feeling anything, and a notification appears stating that the River Styx effect is being activated. Several notifications appear informing him that he is immune to all types of attacks and strikes. The young man can't believe what he's reading and tries to understand what this is. He thinks that according to the legend, if you immerse your body in the River Styx, you will become an invincible warrior. The goddess Thetis dipped her son into the River Styx to make him the strongest warrior. However, the tips of the boy's heels were not wet. Because of that, it later became a chill's weak point. You then assumes he is now completely invincible since he's submerged from head to toe. Outside Cerberus' mouth, Persephone just watches the enormous dog devouring Dambiuk. The young woman tries to pull the boy out, still in disbelief at what she is seeing. She doesn't give up trying to get the boy out of Cerberus' mouth and keeps pulling him. After much effort, the huge dog spits the low-class god's body far away. Persephone runs towards you to check if he's okay. Looking at the boy and backstory, both drenched in Cerberus' drool, the girl says that it's disgusting. Dambiuk then asks how she could call someone who just came back from the dead disgusting, and she immediately apologizes. The boy begins to stand up and Persephone asks if he is okay. Our protagonist comments that everything is fine and then he just swam out of that river. The goddess also wants to know how you got out of the river alive, and he explains that everything is fine and that he just swam out. However, while he is distracted, the giant dog takes the opportunity and immediately charges to attack his opponent. The creature bites our protagonist's arm and then starts shaking him from side to side. However, surprising the monster and Persephone, Dambiuk seems unfazed by the bite and asks if Cerberus is done. The young man begins to mock the dog, saying that it was only tickling him. The goddess, watching this, thinks that there is no way a low-class god could be fine after being bitten by Cerberus, so she assumes that you has received the blessing of immortality. Seeing that he could do whatever he wanted with that blessing, Dambiuk comments that he's going to take the monster for a walk. After being released by the dog, our protagonist just stares at the animal. The beast, feeling challenged, keeps growling furiously at what is happening. You respond that there's no point in doing that, and if the dog continues with that attitude, there will be no walk. Finally, the monster sighs and turns around. While watching the creature walk away, you think that strategy worked well at the pet shop, but it didn't work with that huge dog. Unexpectedly, Cerberus bites his chain and then sits, waiting for Dambiuk to walk him. Seeing the sparkle in the animal's eyes, our protagonist thinks that Cerberus, despite everything, was still a dog. He then gets ready for the walk, holding onto the chains the dog was wearing. Persephone asks for a moment and calls for Yu's attention. The lady states that it's been a while since Cerberus last went for a walk, so Dambiuk should take it easy. The boy says he can handle it and comments that when he worked at the pet shop, it was called the Dog President. Before he can continue talking, Cerberus starts running and pulls Yu along. Holding onto the chains Cerberus was leading, Dambiuk begins to ask the dog to stop. He crashes his body several times against objects on the ground and continues to be dragged for kilometers. Because of that, our protagonist even acquires a new skill. Behind him, Persephone begins to question what the boy is doing. The young woman then asks Dambiuk to use his divinity to strengthen his body. Yu doesn't understand what the girl is saying and wonders how she is keeping up with Cerberus at that speed. Persephone continues, stating that he needs to strengthen himself with divinity because Cerberus is too strong. And upon hearing the girl say that, the young man realizes something. Yu thinks that divinity is some sort of attribute but didn't know it could be used. While still being dragged, Dambiuk asks how to do that, and the goddess asks if he doesn't know how to use divinity. Dambiuk replies that he really doesn't know, and hearing this, the goddess is incredulous. She gets annoyed, commenting that it's impossible, but Dambiuk keeps insisting that he doesn't know. The wind blowing against his face was already torturing him, and Yu wonders how long that dog will keep running. Persephone tries to explain to Yu that he should recall the feeling of using his power. However, the young man remains reluctant, but already irritated. Persephone states that he should just try, and eventually he would get it. The boy begins to think about what the goddess said regarding the feeling of using his power, and he recalls that his sword god's instinct ability activated suddenly during the battle with Charon. The goddess, trying to be clearer, explains that controlling divinity is like controlling the water inside your body. The boy then does just that, closing his eyes, imagining as if he were controlling water. A golden aura begins to cover his body, and he quickly opens his eyes and pulls Cerberus back. The dog, which was frantically running, quickly stops, not understanding what just happened. Yu, using his divinity, manages to make the huge dog stop running immediately. Dambiuk doesn't understand what is happening and can't even believe what is right in front of his eyes. The woman then says that this is great and also comments that he should focus the divinity on the part of his body he wants to strengthen. Cerberus isn't happy with this, so the dog bites his own chain and tries to compete in strength with Yu. Seeing that he couldn't keep up due to Cerberus' strength, the young man gets anxious. Then he decides to do what Persephone said and starts focusing his power on one part of his body. Yu does so and then pulls the enormous monster back with all his strength. With that, he manages to throw Cerberus into the air. Seeing this, Persephone is in shock, not believing that the boy had that much strength. After throwing the dog, our protagonist makes the monster crash its back against the ground. Dambiuk says that's enough walking for today and tells Cerberus that they should head back. The dog, with his immense strength, doesn't give up the fight and continues growling at Yu. Realizing that the animal would resist, the young man states that he will do it his way. Immediately afterward, he begins to drag the huge monster through the forest. Persephone starts laughing at the dog being dragged away and then quickly follows the boy. The girl was a little incredulous, as it was Dambiuk's first time using divinity, and yet he managed to do all that. Smiling, she says she thinks she found a good employee this time. The boy thinks it is all strange since he can clearly see that Persephone is strong and she didn't interfere in the situation. Dambiuk, trying to get answers, asks if he could ask the goddess something, and she replies that he can. Yu then questions why the young woman doesn't get closer to Cerberus. He then states that he is sure Persephone could control the dog easily. The girl lowers her head at that question and responds that there are restrictions. That only makes our protagonist even more confused, and he asks what that means. She explains that Cerberus is a guard of the underworld who holds back countless lost souls that try to return to the normal world. That's why she can't touch the monster, because she is one of them. One of the spirits that want to return to the human world. As the two walk, Persephone explains that she is bound to the underworld and couldn't do anything about Cerberus. Dambiuk thinks to himself that, in mythology, Hades kidnapped Persephone and trapped her in the underworld. The boy also comments that the goddess has probably spent an unimaginable amount of time alone, and that is quite sad. However, afraid of what might happen, he thinks he needs to get rid of this sense of injustice since Persephone's husband is Hades, Zeus's brother. In other words, a low-class god like him couldn't do anything at all. Suddenly, backstory appears and our protagonist looks at the fox. He apologizes for having completely forgotten about the animal. After some time dragging Cerberus along the forest path, they finally arrive at the enormous gate Cerberus was guarding. There, the dog stands up and becomes alert. You ask why he suddenly changed like that. Persephone explains that the dog is chasing the dead since, despite his appearance, Cerberus takes his job seriously. The goddess informs him that once the boy chains Cerberus back to the pillar, he will have finished his morning duties. While holding Cerberus's chain, Dambiuk thinks that Hades must be very strict. He also mentions that he doesn't know why the god is raising a dog only he could handle. As he gets closer to the pillar where Cerberus is tied, the boy's intuition talent activates and he notices something. For some reason, a strange object was inside that massive structure. The young man begins to wrap his hand in divinity and thinks he should take a look. Persephone says they're done with the morning duties and should only prepare for the afternoon. But when she looks at Dambiuk, she notices that the boy is frantically hitting the pillar. She doesn't understand what he is doing, and suddenly Dambiuk finds the object he was looking for and begins to pull it out. For some reason, the goddess seems incredulous at what she is seeing. Yu says he saw something inside that structure and pulled the object out. We see that the object is Cerberus' collar, which Hades used to train the animal and allows anyone to give him commands. Persephone says it's unbelievable because she would never have thought Hades hid it there. She also says she couldn't find it no matter how much she searched. The girl asks how you found it, and the boy replies that it was just a hunch. Dambiuk asks if it's really that great for the girl to be completely amazed. The goddess explains that it is because Cerberus is the symbol of the underworld, and commanding him is the same as controlling the entire underworld. Looking at it, Dambiuk thinks it just looks like a regular dog collar. He assumes he couldn't use it since it's Hades' property. Persephone puts her hand over her mouth and thinks for a moment. Then she says it doesn't matter and the young man could use the item whenever he wanted. The girl explains that it's not like using it would be against the rules and Hades always told her to look for that collar. Persephone explains that Hades said if she found that collar, she could train Cerberus. Hearing this, Dambiuk thinks to himself that he shouldn't miss the chance to make this job easier. The young man approaches the huge dog and asks it to let him put the collar on. However, Cerberus does not allow it and remains resistant to use presents. Noticing this, Yu tells the dog that he hasn't learned his lesson. Once again challenged, the monster begins growling at the boy. However, after a massage session on the poor creature's face, Cerberus gives in and stops resisting. After putting the collar on the animal, the boy says it looks good and it would have been nicer if the dog had behaved from the beginning. Seeing the endless possibilities he could have, our protagonist starts to laugh out loud. Then he imitates Ash from Pokemon and begins giving several commands to the dog. He even makes that huge monster roll on the ground. Laughing, Dambiuk comments that he finally got to see the cute side of Cerberus. Finally, our protagonist orders Cerberus, as punishment, to sit facing the wall and think about what he has done. The young man starts laughing again and comments that at this rate, the job would be a breeze. However, the boy doesn't notice that Persephone is approaching from behind, just watching him laugh. She gently touches Yu's shoulder, catching the boy's attention. Dambiuk turns around, asking Persephone to see this, but suddenly the woman touches his cheek. After the touch, the goddess begins to recite some magical runes. The boy doesn't understand this sudden action, but he soon falls to his knees on the ground. Persephone states that Hades had given Cerberus 2 final commands. One was to monitor the dead who try to escape from the underworld, and the other was to monitor her, and that's why she did that. At that moment, Dambiak's consciousness begins to fade as if he were feeling sleepy. You just watch as the goddess leave, and then the woman wishes the boy a good sleep. She turns around and starts walking away while saying that Yu doesn't need to worry because she would return before Hades. Fallen on the ground and almost asleep, the boy thinks that for Hades, the most important thing wasn't the underworld. The boy thinks he can't let this happen, but sleep takes over his body and he falls asleep. After an unknown amount of time, Dambiak finally begins to regain consciousness and sees Baksoria above him. Confused, the boy just tries to understand what is happening. Suddenly, he remembers what happened and gets up, wondering why he had fallen asleep. Looking around, Yu searches for Persephone but realizes she is no longer there. Desperate, the boy thinks he is in trouble and that his life is over. Activating the part-time job system, the boy also wonders how long he slept. Seeing that only a few minutes have passed, he calms down. Dambiak gets up and starts running, but before leaving, he orders Cerberus to end his punishment and guard the gates of the underworld. Running, he thinks that normally Lady Persephone couldn't leave the underworld because of the monster. So if it gets out that Persephone escaped the underworld because of a low-class god, Hades will punish him severely. The boy begins to wonder how far the goddess has gone since he has to find and bring her back quickly. Remembering that he gained the wind speed ability, the boy comes up with an idea. Yu activates that ability and a gust of wind begins to cover his body. And because his physical condition is extraordinary, upon activating the ability, it improves drastically. As he starts running, the boy realizes he is extremely fast. He is impressed with the speed he managed to reach, and another idea comes to mind, so Dambiak also strengthens his legs with divinity. To gain a wide view, the young man jumps into the air. Up there, the boy becomes unbalanced but quickly regains his composure. Finally, looking around to find Persephone, the boy sees something. The goddess was on a boat, sailing toward the exit of the underworld. Having found his target, the boy celebrates and takes action. The lady on the boat under the moonlight continues calmly. Suddenly, a sound echoes, startling Persephone, who becomes alert. She realizes her boat has stopped and assumes it has hit a rock. Looking at the lake, she sees a humanoid figure emerging from it and quickly panics. Dambiak, completely soaked, asks where Persephone was going in such a hurry. Yu, irritated, states that she said no one should cross the river, and she retorts that she just really wanted to see her mother. The boy, remembering his own mother, sympathizes a little with the goddess. Then Yu says that even so, she should have at least given him a warning and not just done that. The woman says there were still 2 days until Hades returns, and besides, she had never been caught before. Hearing that, Dambiak is astonished, realizing that this wasn't the first time Persephone had done this. Then suddenly, they have an accident as the boat hits a rock coral. Being weak and small, the sailboat takes a huge hit. Water begins to enter the boat they were on, and Dambiak gets annoyed. The young man states that he doesn't think the boat will hold up until they get back. Thinking he has no choice, the boy makes a drastic decision and gives in to the goddess's wish. He then holds his nose and prepares to dive back into that filthy river. The boy does it by jumping into the river and holding tightly onto the boat. Yu begins to push the boat and asks Persephone to hold on tight. After some time traveling, the two finally reach solid ground. Persephone and Dambiak approach a place that is extremely bright and beautiful. There, the girl stretches and says that it all looks incredibly amazing. Yu asks if she could at least promise him one thing, and she looks confused. He asks her to return as soon as she finishes the visit. The girl says he is worrying too much and mentions again that she has never been caught. Yu states that he would die if Persephone were caught, and taking his hand, the goddess says everything would be fine and that he could accompany her. After some time walking, they finally approach a cave, and the goddess reveals that this is the place. Entering the cave, the girl begins to call out for her mother. Inside the cave, Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, doesn't understand what is happening. The woman stands up and tries to grasp the situation, and Persephone, upon seeing her, becomes emotional. Demeter simply can't believe this is her daughter, Persephone, and the girl responds that it is. The two have a beautiful mother-daughter moment. From afar, Dambiak thinks he doesn't want to ruin the mood since there is no place for him there. Looking to the side, the boy sees a flower growing and finds it incredible. Because in mythology, whenever Persephone was in the underworld, all plants would wither as a result of Demeter's sadness. Yu tells the goddess that he remembered he had something to do, so he would go ahead. Persephone asks if he wasn't going to keep watch, and he replies that he trusts her and will meet her at 8 so they can return. Before he leaves, the goddess calls his attention, and while hugging her mother, she thanks Dambiak for his kindness. After fixing the boat, the boy thinks he is finally ready to cross the river. Looking at his phone, he sees it's the scheduled time and Persephone should arrive soon. Suddenly, a figure appears behind Yu. Looking to the side, thinking it was Persephone, the boy is startled by something. A man with parted black hair says an insolent rebel came to work. At that moment, the system starts informing that the intuition skill has been activated, and several danger warnings appear for our protagonist, stating that he's going to die. Hades, extremely irritated, asks where his wife Persephone is. Desperate, Dambyuk thinks his body is giving in just from the words of that man and doesn't understand why Hades is already there. In the blink of an eye, the god of the underworld approaches Yu and asks if the boy is an idiot. Hades says he doesn't understand how someone like our protagonist managed to find Cerberus's collar and even helped Persephone escape. At that moment, the boy can't react and is just paralyzed by Hades' words. The god finally begins to raise his hand toward the boy, stating that nothing else matters. Then, as he brings his palm closer to Yu's face, Hades tells him to die. But before he touches the young man's face, someone asks what Hades is doing. Persephone, who has appeared there, asks Hades why her husband is trying to kill an innocent god. The man, who previously had an intimidating posture, shrinks a bit and tries to ask where the girl was. However, irritated, the goddess begins to approach, stating that he was the one who told the workers to find Cerberus's collar. The goddess says they completed the mission given by Hades, so he couldn't be angry. Hades agrees with the girl, but scolds her for leaving without leaving a message. Still furious, Persephone says she didn't run away and came back right after visiting her mother. The god continues trying to explain himself, but the woman doesn't let him speak. Seeing the situation, Yu notices that Hades, who had an imposing posture before, is now stumbling over his own words. With a soft expression, the god of the underworld simply says he was worried. The goddess of agriculture comments that there is still more to say, so they will continue the discussion at home. Persephone pulls out a gift from a portal and quickly hands it to our protagonist, saying that it is a bonus. Hades can't believe his wife is letting the boy live and asks what this is. She explains that Dambyuk did the job correctly, so she's just giving the boy a reward. The girl touches the boy's head, stating that she will ensure he gets paid, so he doesn't need to worry. Suddenly, a bright light descends from the sky onto Yu, making the boy disappear. Shortly afterward, he appears in another unknown place. The young man is still in shock from the whole situation, realizing he had almost died several times during this job. Looking at the present, the boy is reluctant to open it. Yu thinks that Persephone said it was a bonus, so it must be something good. Opening the present, the boy sees a light and is surprised by something. He notices that inside there are two fruits. One is the forbidden fruit that gives the power to distinguish between good and evil, and the other is the golden apple. Seeing that the gift contained everything he was looking for, the boy can't believe it and thinks that with the golden apple, his mother could get better. The young man starts to think that he doesn't know if humans can eat the fruit of the gods. However, determined, he makes a decision. Dambyuk looks at the purple fruit and thinks about what he should do with it. Sometime later in a hospital, someone can be heard shouting that a miracle has happened. The doctor is telling our protagonist's mother that her cancer cells have completely disappeared. He also says that this was something inexplicable in terms of modern medicine, with no way to describe it. Crying, the woman asks how such a miracle could happen, and Dambyuk says that from now on, there would only be happiness. Smiling, he was happy that the golden apple really cured his mother. He also remembers that to make the woman eat it, he had to prepare a juice. The boy tells the woman that the doctors said she was healthy enough to be discharged, so they should go home. Outside, Yu and his mother approach a taxi. Extremely happy, the boy makes sure to open the door for the woman, who then gets into the vehicle. Inside, Yu asks the taxi driver to take them to a certain neighborhood where they lived. However, the man replies that they would have to go around to get there. Our protagonist doesn't understand why. The taxi driver states that the boy probably doesn't know, but a disaster occurred in that area, and it's on all the news channels. Quickly, the man turns on the radio, and a report can be heard stating that something is happening near Ueda Park. Currently, a cylindrical-type dungeon has appeared there. Guilds and hunters are gathering to investigate this dungeon, but are facing difficulties. The boy's mother, upon hearing this, starts to touch his shoulder. She comments that she could go home alone, so you should go to that dungeon. Smiling, she says that people meet him there and that she can't wait to see the young man on TV. After agreeing and getting out of the vehicle, Dambyuk's mother waves goodbye to the boy and says she will see him on TV. A bit later, near sunset, the sun can be seen setting. Looking at a huge tower in front of him, Yu thinks that this dungeon will be quite a battle. The boy states that you will have to work hard all night again, but it's the only solution. Finally, Dambyuk asked Bucksora to get ready, and soon they set off for this new challenge. The boy thinks that before entering the dungeon, he wanted to take a look at the god's store. He realizes that his payment hasn't been deposited yet, so there won't be much to buy. The system notifies that Dambyuk's profile is being updated, and he notices he has gained a new title. Yu, reading this, is confused, not understanding what it is about. Upon reading the title's specifications, the boy sees that he will be able to dominate any dog. He doesn't know if this is good or bad, and is even embarrassed to be called the president of dogs. However, suddenly someone in the crowd near the dungeon announces that a famous person is there. Our protagonist thinks they are talking about him and gets startled. In fact, the people are impressed with Ju So-yul, who is being interviewed by some reporters. Yu is relieved not to have been recognized and feels uncomfortable with the girl's presence there. In the interview, the only thing the girl says is that, as always, the Samgun Guild will do its best. Dambyuk is a little surprised since So-yul is literally ignoring all the reporters. He also thinks he doesn't have time for this, so Yu disguises himself and prepares to enter the dungeon. The guild, along with Ju, enters the dungeon, and after going further in, they realize that the enemies there must be hiding, preparing an ambush. The members comment that the dungeon's enemies were just some dogs, so there was nothing to worry about. A big-nosed guy nudges his friend and says that the boy got bitten on the butt last time by a dog. However, when the boy is accused of that, he becomes extremely irritated and argues with his companion. So Yule immediately asks everyone in the room to be quiet. Even so, the two friends continue to whisper to each other. A long-haired man who seemed to be So Yule's assistant finds the girl's sudden behavior strange. He thinks the girl is acting differently than usual and wonders why that is. The guy knows the young woman is not one to talk much in the first place, but it wouldn't make sense for her to tell everyone to be silent just for that. He imagines that Ju must have seen something terrifying to act that way. After some time walking, they arrive at a specific room. So Yule notices and informs her companions that they are arriving. A dog with a demonic appearance enters the room with an imposing presence. Several demon dogs appear, forming an army in front of the guild. The long-haired man and the other guild members are startled to realize what kind of monster that is. The two friends who were just talking earlier become annoyed, saying no one had warned them that those monsters would be there. Feeling apprehensive, the long-haired man thinks those are death hounds, and even the smallest scratch from these venomous canines would kill a person in 10 minutes. Because these creatures are extremely poisonous and dangerous monsters. Starting to draw a dagger, the sub-leader of the guild thinks that it's just a dangerous dog. Hugh orders those who are weak in hand-to-hand combat to retreat immediately, and the rest should follow her to face the creatures head-on. However, surprising the young woman, the voice of a boy echoes through the place. The long-haired man thinks that sound came from someone in the guild and scolds them, but the masked person replies that it wasn't them this time. Then the snub-nosed man says he thinks that sound came from behind the dogs. Behind the pack of monsters, a person starts to appear, calling the dogs. The figure of our protagonist can be seen by everyone in the guild. The long-haired man can't believe that person managed to tame the death hounds and becomes apprehensive. He thinks that to control these creatures, the figure must be a humanoid monster or a half-demon. To protect his friend, the man asks Soyul to move back, and then he steps forward. Wielding his small sword, he orders the figure to appear and reveal themselves. Pointing his sword at the monsters, he asks what kind of creature that is. Dambia walks toward the guild while asking the young man to lower his sword. Revealing himself, Yu states that his dogs are getting scared. The long-haired man can't believe that the person who tamed the death hounds is a human. Behind the guild's sub-leader, one of the death hounds appears. Noticing this, Yu activates his wind speed and rushes toward the young woman. He charges toward her and, in the blink of an eye, reaches the girl. The long-haired man thinks the boy is going to attack their leader, and at this moment, Yu grabs the girl's arm. Our protagonist prepares to strike as if he were about to hit Soyul, but he only pulls the young woman back and gives a small knock on the death hound that was behind her. It becomes clear that Dambiak's title is only activated if he touches the dog. Finally, the leader's companion realizes that the young man wasn't trying to attack the girl. Chu, even with all this commotion, remains silent, watching Yu. And while holding the girl's hand, Yu notices something strange about her bracelet for some reason. Smiling, Dambiak says to Soyul that they meet again. Looking at the young woman's bracelet, he realizes he wasn't mistaken, and it was the same accessory Persephone was wearing. The young man was about to say something specific, but is interrupted when Ju says it is embarrassing, and that many people are watching. When he realizes it, he sees he is on his knees, holding the girl's hand, and Soyul says it was very rude of him. The scene makes it seem like Dambia was proposing to Ju, but the boy tries to explain that it is a misunderstanding. All the guild members seeing this scene are astonished, crying, and taking pictures. After clearing up the misunderstanding, you can be seen establishing a connection with the death hounds. Then the young man orders all those creatures to sit, and the army of dogs complies. He begins to separate the dogs into squads and gives them orders. Right after, Dambia greets his animals, instructing them to proceed with their mission. One of the dogs starts digging in an area, searching for a precious stone. Upon finding a red crystal, the dog takes it and leaves. It then walks over to Dambiak and hands the crystal to the boy, who happily pets the animal. The long-haired man, seeing that scene, couldn't believe what was happening and asked if it was a dream. Our protagonist analyzes all the crystals brought by the dogs, and then Soyul approaches him and asks where the young man got that ability. Yu doesn't understand the question since he thought everyone believed abilities came directly from birth. Staring at Yu, the boy wonders how the girl knows he acquired that ability. Dambiak replies that he didn't acquire it but was born with that ability, and besides, he has something to ask. The boy starts talking about the girl's bracelet, and the girl becomes attentive for some reason. Finally, observing it, he asks if the bracelet belongs to her. The girl is confused, confirming that it does, since there wouldn't be a reason for her to wear it if it didn't belong to her. Yu begins to bombard the girl with several questions to find out where she got that accessory. Already irritated for not getting answers, our protagonist asks again when the girl bought it. Looking at the bracelet, the young man just thinks there's no doubt about it, because that design is unique, tacky, and extremely distinctive. It was the same friendship bracelet that Miss Persephone had mentioned. He gets even closer to the accessory and keeps trying to understand how Ju has the same bracelet as Persephone. Yu thinks that he thought Ju was just a maniac stalker, but this seemed to be much deeper. Tired of not having his doubts answered, Dambiak asks why the girl is silent. She explains that she got the accessory online, and Yu, using the ability he got from the forbidden fruit, realizes the girl has mostly good intentions. The woman also says that if Dambiak liked the bracelet, she could send him the link, and at that moment, the ability continues to confirm that Yu wasn't lying. To cover up his embarrassment, Yu says that's great since he actually wanted a bracelet like that. For some reason, everyone in the guild interprets this scene the wrong way. The members begin to think the boy has a fetish for women's bracelets and start to judge him. Our protagonist thinks he is confused because he's been traveling between two different worlds, so he overreacted and now he's being labeled as a pervert. Yu states in his thoughts that his image is going down the drain at this rate. So since things have gone this far, he would just change the subject to expose that crazy stalker. That's why he asks how the girl knew Baksori's name before. So Yul replies that she just heard other people say it. She even heard someone say, "Let's go Baksori" at the portal, and at that moment, the boy becomes extremely perplexed, seeing that she wasn't lying. An awkward silence remains between Dambiak and Ju. He starts to think he's been acting crazy all this time because he simply misunderstood things. After this event, you can see a huge gate and a cloud of dust rising. Inside a room, a demonic dog with red skin says that the weaklings who set foot there will die now. The demon also starts laughing, stating that he will kill everyone for their crimes. However, before he can continue his speech, he gets punched in the face. Yu, feeling completely embarrassed and irritated, begins a beatdown session on that poor dungeon boss. The long-haired man, seeing that scene, can't believe the young man is doing that to a boss. After beating that animal alone, our protagonist is left panting. With a frightening, psychotic expression, he catches everyone in the guild's attention. Yu approaches the long-haired man, grabs his shoulders, and asks him not to tell anyone that he came to this dungeon. Dambiak also says that everything he said before was a secret. The long-haired man promptly agrees, saying that he will also tell the other guild members. So Yu will just watches the scene, remaining silent for a moment. The woman finally looks at her bracelet and begins to think of something mysterious. Outside the cylindrical dungeon, a crowd of people is gathered. They all notice that Miss So-Yul is coming out and start to crowd around her. Several reporters and questions begin heading toward the girl. Yu, disguise, starts to blend into the crowd. At this moment, Dambiak takes advantage of Ju distracting the crowd to disguise himself and slip away without being noticed. Dambiak thinks he was careless because he gained so many talents out of nowhere and rushed into becoming a hunter. But to become a hunter in that country, one must first take an official test to qualify, and this serves to ensure all hunters are registered. He isn't an official hunter, and it's undeniable that he entered the dungeon and the portal without any authorization. And if public opinion gets worse because of something like this, his divinity could decrease, making it harder to find a job. In his thoughts, the boy says he will let Miss So-Yul draw attention and quickly get out of there. As he walks through the crowd, Yu bumps into a blonde boy and immediately apologizes. Even with that disguise, the blonde guy recognizes our protagonist and asks if he is Dambiak. The snobby young man starts laughing at our protagonist and confirms that he is indeed Yu Dambiak. Taking off his glasses, the jerk calls Yu a talentless insect and asks why he was crawling around there. The crowd around So-Yul, upon hearing that Hunter Dambiak is present, turns their attention to him. Everyone doesn't understand why the blonde guy called our protagonist talentless and looks confused. Seeing this, the boy thinks that of all the people who could have recognized him, that guy was the worst option. The blonde grabs the boy's shoulder and asks if he isn't going to greet him, then mentions how much the young man has grown. Dambiak thinks that Chien Jung-nak is one of the people who tormented his school days, a jerk from a wealthy family. One could say that instead of being governed by gods, this world was controlled by those with a lot of money who did whatever they wanted. Yu, irritated, says that the circumstances are no longer the same and that this situation is different. Smiling, he grabs Chien's arm and says that the blonde hasn't changed and still has the same foul mouth just because he comes from a rich family. Dambiak thinks he intends to overcome even his childhood traumas, and at that moment, Jung can't believe that the talentless worm is saying that. Jung states that our protagonist is full of himself just because he became somewhat famous. Then he says that from what he saw in the news, Dambiak completed a labyrinth dungeon and destroyed some kind of portal, but something there seemed off. Chien, taking off Dambiak's cap, starts to say that the boy had no talent at all and should at least come up with a believable lie. The guy doesn't stop mocking Yu, and everyone around starts listening. They begin whispering that the young man is probably a fraud since he isn't even on the Hunter's website. Feeling anxious, the boy thinks that this is bad, and he needs to do something about it. So Yul arrives and defends Yu, snatching the cap from Chien's hand. After doing so, she gives a small tap on the cap to clean the dirt off. Then Yu tosses the cap to our protagonist and asks him to catch it. The blonde jerk asks why the girl is protecting that useless, talentless worm. The girl retorts that not having talent doesn't mean being worthless, and besides, he should take responsibility for his words. Chien continues to hurl insults at Dambiak, cursing the boy and saying he has no talent. Yu looks at the girl and notices she's making some kind of signal with her head. At first, the boy doesn't understand what Yu wants him to do. Then the boy realizes she's asking him to show his powers, and even though he's reluctant, he agrees. He uses his wind talent and leaps onto a bus. The rich kid is stunned by what he sees because he didn't believe in the boy. Jung comments that someone without talent couldn't possibly do that and continues to complain. The insults don't stop, and Dambiak just thinks it's a waste of time dealing with that jerk. Seeing that nothing would work, the young man says he is leaving, but Chien doesn't let him and continues mocking the boy. After a while, Yu thinks that after the incident with Chien, he realized he had to pass the hunter's test as soon as possible. Luckily, he heard there was a hunter test scheduled in Dokdo. After getting ready, the boy stands in front of his apartment, wondering how he will get to the exam, and suddenly a car approaches him. He says he wanted to go alone. When he looks inside the vehicle, he sees something. Chu is calling the boy because she's going to take him to the hunter's test. When he gets out of the vehicle, he thanks the girl because he arrived quickly. Thanks to her. Already on the island where the test is taking place, a crowd can be seen gathered, ready for the challenge. Amidst the crowd, Yu stands beside So Yul, and the boy wonders why the girl followed him there. Our protagonist asks if the future successor of a guild could be so casual like this, and she replies that she had no plans for that day. The boy asks why the young woman is being so informal all of a sudden, and she replies that they are the same age, so they could be friends. Not wanting to argue, Dambiak just agrees, knowing he couldn't counter that. A voice over a loudspeaker calls number 1117 to Area H for the physical exam, and Yu realizes that's his number. The boy asks Yu to take care of backstory, and then he heads to the test. He comments that he knew the girl came only to pet the fox. Since besides giving seeds to backstory, Yu doesn't do anything else suspicious, and her intentions always seem good, there's no problem. Finally, the young man's test begins, and the loudspeaker asks him to note that only equipment provided by the company can be used for the exam. The first test was lower body strength, and the boy would have to do squats with a huge weight. Setting it to the maximum strength level, our protagonist realizes he couldn't even move the weight. The boy couldn't even understand how this was supposed to be a basic physical exam. Suddenly, a figure arrives saying he should know his place. Yu notices that the nasty voice belongs to Chien, one of the examiners, and the jerk says that our protagonist needs to hurry up or he'll be disqualified. Our protagonist thinks that his plan was to slip out discreetly after getting his license, but he'd have to do something about it. So he starts to concentrate his divinity into his body, and Jung keeps mocking the boy. The boy does so many repetitions that he gets 6 stars on the lower body strength test. He continues his test, getting 6 stars on the upper body strength test. During a general strength test, Yu was even getting bored because he was completing it so easily. Even his speed reached a 6-star level, and seeing all this, Chien gets extremely irritated, saying it was impossible. The jerk grabs another examiner by the collar and asks him to stop this right now, but the man apologizes and says he couldn't stop the test. Jung keeps insisting that the exam is a mistake, and it doesn't make sense for that loser to be doing all that. After the results come out, our protagonist was nearly perfect in almost all the tests, so Dambiak proceeds to the next room. Elsewhere, a person standing on top of a magic circle says he would like to give his sincere congratulations to all aspiring hunters. He mentions that the next test will judge the indispensable quality needed to become a hunter, the spirit of teamwork. The man explains that they are not allowed to use any equipment besides what is provided, and everyone should focus solely on their group's monsters. After pressing a button, the floor under all the groups starts to descend, and Yu, looking down, sees some aquatic creatures waiting for him. When they arrive at the bottom, one of the huge monsters moves to attack the young man's group. Then the creature charges at one of the members, who was bald. The bald man barely manages to defend himself but is thrown backward. He ends up in a disadvantageous position, and the fish steps on him. The creature prepares to finish off a human. But before that human could see his death, someone starts running toward the bald man. This figure is Yu, who steps forward to defend his teammate. Turning back, he asks if his friend could get up. Then the boy says he'll take care of this side and asks the bald man to go in the other direction. After dodging the fishman's attack, Dambiak charges a powerful strike with his sword. The young man concentrates enough and then hits the fishman's chest with a full force attack. The creature, after having his chest pierced, falls lifeless to the ground. Once again, Yu notices someone is in trouble and he looks to the side. He sees 2 people being attacked, and one of the victims is a blonde girl who couldn't withstand the blows from the fish monster. With extreme speed and his swordsmanship talent, Yu moves and slices through several of those monsters at once. The people in his group are stunned, not even understanding what just happened before their eyes. The group realizes that number 1117 killed all those monsters alone, and thanks to him, they could all pass the test easily. However, Chien, who was watching this, isn't happy with the situation. Jung, with his malicious plan, pulls a strange red potion from his pocket. The jerk pours the potion into the mouth of one of the dead fishmen, bringing the beast back to life. Dambiak, who had his back turned, doesn't notice one of the beasts approaching to attack him. He barely manages to defend himself, but is immediately thrown backward. The young man tries to stay upright to avoid rolling away, and he succeeds. The people in our protagonist group are in complete panic when they see that creature. The monster, with its red eyes, becomes furious and moves to finish off those humans. It manages to put its foot on the face of the blonde girl, pressing her against the ground. The creature coldly continues the massacre of all those people without mercy for anyone. After slaughtering all those humans, the beast shows no remorse while Yu is shocked by what he sees. The loudspeaker announces that everyone in Dambiak's group has failed the tests and only he survived. At this moment, Chin appears above him saying that the boy can no longer earn points without his teammates and asks if Yu is still going to continue. Finally, the jerk says he warned Dambiak that he should know his place. The young man, irritated, thinks he knew something was wrong but didn't imagine that Monster Jung would go so far just to make him fail. Clenching his fists, the boy starts walking forward, and Jung asks where he is going. Our protagonist just tells the boy to shut up and starts covering his body with divinity again. He thinks he will definitely pass and become a great hunter, no matter what happens. With all this strength, Yu starts slashing all the monsters inside that place, even the beasts other groups were facing. After finishing an army of fishmen, the young man states that even if he can't earn team points, he can earn individual ones. Looking up, Qian and the man in a suit conducting the test are frightened by the boy's strength. The man conducting the test is finally about to give the result. However, an alarm starts to sound and an emergency alert announces that everyone in the test room should head to the nearest shelter. A huge tsunami has been detected near Dokdo Island and is heading in that direction, causing everyone to panic. The alarm sound continues to echo everywhere, telling everyone to evacuate. Yu thinks he needs to see what's happening to understand the situation. He then jumps toward the magic circle where Chin is standing. Right after, he jumps again to return to the surface while the jerk warns that it's too dangerous. After getting out of the hole he was in, Yu quickly turns around, seeing something. He notices that the sea has crashed against the building he was in and pierced the walls. The young man is in disbelief, unable to believe that was a wave. He thinks that if this continues, everyone down there will die. A glimmer of hope appears and something shows up in front of him. The system informs him that his payment has arrived and Persephone apologizes for taking so long to process it. Yu begins searching the god's shop for something useful in this situation. After searching, he finally finds a skill called Sword Art Water Divider. Backstory appears and runs toward his owner carrying Yu's jacket in his mouth. Yu tries to understand why the fox is there and where So Yeol it is. But seeing that the wave is hitting the wall more violently each time, he says that doesn't matter right now. He asks his pet to transform into a sword and the young man starts to concentrate on using his new skill. When he activates it, his eyes turn golden and his body is enveloped in an aura. The boy feels like he's floating and right after, he manages to cut the massive wave coming toward him in two. Dambiak is extremely happy, seeing that he managed to stop the advance of the tsunami. But the water that was coming violently now falls slowly over our protagonist, drenching him. Having almost drowned, the boy starts spitting out water and the alarm sounds again, asking everyone to go to the nearest shelter. The voice echoing through the loudspeaker informs them that there is a high possibility of a second tsunami, so everyone should take shelter. Dambiak panics, realizing that another one of those things could hit him again. And looking at the destroyed place, he thinks he won't be able to stop another tsunami. Suddenly, the system materializes in front of him, showing an urgent recruitment notice in which Poseidon wants to repair his palace. He realizes that tsunamis are becoming frequent all over the human world, meaning it's all coming from the god's world. The young man puts on his jacket while thinking that he has already had his things stolen by dwarves. Persephone tried to escape whenever she had a chance, and so far the gods have only caused problems. So with no choice, the boy promptly accepts this new job. Right after that, he is teleported underwater to an extremely beautiful place. The boy looks at some sculptures there and is amazed. An unknown figure appears beside him, and Yu asks who the unknown being is. Dambiak, looking closer, realizes that it is Hephaestus. The god begins to laugh, stating that he knew he would see our protagonist's face again. Going over the pet backstory, he is happy that the moon fox has grown. However, the animal seems uninterested and turns his face away to avoid being petted by Hephaestus. The god is extremely sad that the fox doesn't like him, and Yu explains that backstory is very shy. However, the boy also thinks that the fox really likes So Yeol, but with Hephaestus, it's different. But putting that aside, Yu asks why Hephaestus is there. The deity responds that there's no way the repair blacksmith would be left out of a situation like this, and the man states he's glad Yu is there. And now he would explain the situation before they got to work. The god asks the boy to look at a specific point. He explains that, unfortunately, that side of the palace was damaged and the water was being drained into the human world. Hephaestus explains that for the gods, it's just a pool leaking, but for humans, it's a massive tsunami. Yu is extremely shocked, not understanding how the barrier broke like that, and he asks what happened. The blacksmith asks if Dambiak sees that while pointing in a direction, and there, where the god pointed, an interdimensional portal can be seen. Hephaestus says that those portals are always a pain, and even with all the efforts to destroy those things, they always come back. Yu is shocked, thinking he believed the portals were creations of the gods since they are similar to dungeons, but he was wrong. Backstory senses something and starts nudging Dambiak tirelessly. The young man is confused, wondering what happened to his animal. Then it becomes clear that the portal, which had been quiet before, started to transform into a vortex, sucking in everything around it. A strong force begins pulling everything in that place. Yugisanoi, thinking that this world of the gods doesn't give him a second of peace. Hephaestus states that he will take care of it, so the boy should hold on to something because if he gets sucked into the portal, it's over. However, Baxora cannot hold on and starts getting pulled in. Seeing his pet being dragged into the portal, Dambiak panics, wondering what he could do. Hephaestus begins to create a power of flames that forms above his head. A massive portal appears and a hand starts emerging from the power created by Hephaestus. Hephaestus continues concentrating while invoking his magic above his head. The man begins to charge a powerful attack and soon after, he unleashes it. Then the hand Hephaestus created with his energy does the same and strikes the purple portal. However, apparently the massive portal doesn't suffer any effect. Seeing that he wasn't managing to stabilize that thing, the god of smithing panics. He keeps invoking his fire magic around it, but it apparently has no effect. Even concentrating all his power, the portal continues to clash against and repel the fire. Seeing the situation, Dambiak thinks that a god of the highest class is on a completely different level from him. The hands summoned by Hephaestus begin to be overwhelmed by the darkness emitted by the black portal. From the purple portal, a humanoid hand begins to emerge and Yu notices this. Even with Hephaestus trying to stabilize it, it doesn't work and several fish-like creatures start coming out of the wormhole. Yu is impressed, not knowing that portals in the world of the gods also have hordes of invading monsters. Hephaestus calls our protagonist's attention and snaps his fingers. With the snap of his fingers, a portal appears and out of it comes a sword. The god asks our protagonist to take that weapon since he will keep the enemies at bay. While grabbing the sword to wield it, the young man thinks he thought this was a repair job, but he was too unlucky for it to be that simple. Immediately after, he states that he will need a bonus to forget this and charges toward the creatures. The young man passes by one of them, making a slash while getting excited for the fight. However, for some reason, the fishman that was hit just smiles and Yu is startled. The creature that was struck doesn't seem to suffer even a scratch and quickly counterattacks Yu. Dambiak barely manages to dodge and doesn't suffer any injury. Looking at that, he can't believe what he's seeing. Dambiak thinks he hit the monster using his divine power, and even so, the beast counterattacked. At that moment, the fishman speaks, calling the Olympians disgusting. Yu is still in shock with all this information, not even believing that the monster can actually speak. He recalls the moment when he faced a portal for the first time and thought those beasts were weaker than the ones in the dungeons. The boy doesn't let himself be shaken and keeps wielding his sword, ready to attack. However, looking at that army of fish-like creatures, the young man thinks it could be dangerous. Dambiak hears a loud sound, and looking back, he sees an army of fishmen of the same race that came out of the portal, but this time they seem to be allies. The good fishmen begin to charge into battle. Then the two armies of the same species clash, and a fight breaks out between them. A bloody battle ensues, and Yu just watches from a distance, trying to understand why they are fighting each other. Looking at the shoulder of one of them and seeing a blue symbol, the boy assumes that those fishmen might be reinforcements from Poseidon, and that the others are enemies. Our protagonist comments that he was scared because he thought he would have to fight the entire army alone, and because of this, doesn't notice an enemy approaching. At that moment, the creature gets close enough to attack Yu. Thanks to his intuition skill, the young man easily deflects the blow and defends himself. He thinks that if it's just one, it's quite possible to win that fight, and he immediately prepares for combat. With extreme speed, the boy unleashes a flurry of strikes on the monster. After delivering the attacks, he becomes worried because it wasn't a coincidence that the enemy endured his first blow. Dambiak seems irritated but continues unleashing multiple attacks with his sword. Staring at the beast that was defending itself, the boy thinks that even with all his divine power, all he is doing is scratching that monster. The beast then says it's tired of playing with Dambiak and moves to attack the boy. With a terrifying aura, it tells you to die and immediately prepares a strong blow. Fed up with this, the boy prepares for a powerful counterattack, telling his enemy to try to withstand it. He then uses his new skill called Wave Divider against his opponent. The slash cuts through all the monsters in front of Yu, and absolutely everyone freezes after seeing that intense power. The attack passes through and manages to cut most of those creatures into several pieces, even destroying part of Poseidon's palace. Smiling and proud of his power, the boy says that was easy. The surviving creatures become furious and curse our protagonist. Right after seeing the boy's danger, they all charge together at Dambiak. Once again, the boy begins charging his Wave Divider attack, saying it's going to be a piece of cake. He thinks that his abilities are showing, and right after, he moves to strike his opponents. However, he receives a notification that he doesn't have enough skill points for the Wave Divider. In the middle of the attack, the boy realizes he won't be able to use his skill and is shocked. He gets frustrated with his sword, thinking that everything was going so well, but it all went down the drain. The creatures charging at him do not relent and keep coming, and at this moment, Dambiak tries to surrender. But several shots are fired in the direction of the fishmen. All the monsters attacking Yu are hit by gunfire. Suddenly, a person holding a pistol reveals themselves and curses the fishman, threatening him afterward. A familiar short figure pulls the pin from a grenade and immediately throws it toward the monsters, saying that fish taste better when fried. Dambyuk realizes these people are Red Fist and his subordinates. The man apologizes for being late and calls Dambyuk sir. After the grenade explodes, the boy is a little dazed. Looking in the direction of the explosion, he notices that a good portion of the fishmen had suffered minor injuries from that attack. Seeing the dwarves, he is happy that reinforcements have arrived. One of the monsters, as soon as he recovers from the attack, curses those dwarves and gets angry with them. Immediately after, the monster charges to finish off those beings. The blonde dwarf with his weapon in hand remains undeterred and keeps pointing his pistol at his enemy. However, he notices that for some reason, the fishman is holding a rock. The beast throws that object at the dwarf's hand, causing him to lose balance with the weapon. Then the creature moves to finish off the little one. The enemy manages to land a powerful kick squarely on the blonde's stomach, sending him flying past Red Fist. Seeing his subordinate get hit, the dwarf chief becomes extremely angry. He grabs his hammer and charges to return the attack against the fishman. The beast can't do anything and is simply crushed by the immense strength of that small dwarf. Seeing this, Dambyuk is impressed and in disbelief. Realizing that the monster was finished with just one blow, he concludes that the dwarf's hammer is incredibly strong. Pausing to think, he remembers that when he fell into the river Styx, he accidentally used the dwarf's hammer because of the skill he received. Dambyuk, staring at that powerful aura, feels scared and desperate. Finally, with a terrifying expression, the creature calls everyone their insects. The creatures sent by Poseidon think that this is their lord and start celebrating because he stopped the vortex. For some reason, as he stares at the creature, Dambyuk can't believe that this is Poseidon. The monster emits a terrifying purple aura and is smiling. Yu then surprises the fishmen and asks them to wait. The boy questions if the owner of that chilling aura is really Poseidon, and his army realizes that the man does seem strange. The creatures say that looking closely at being doesn't seem like Poseidon, and Dambyuk begins to feel something sinister. He thinks that this threatening presence is the same as the one that came from the portal, and the young man also thinks that besides all that, his intuition is now screaming. All of his instincts scream that this creature was dangerous, and at that moment, the unknown being looks in the direction of those insects and calls them bastards. The being starts to create purple energy at the tip of his trident. Seeing this, Dambyuk asks everyone to be careful, because something is coming. The ball of purple energy grows larger at the tip of the trident, and this fake Poseidon prepares to launch it. The fishmen watching can only watch the scene because they can't react in time. Then from the purple energy, several slashes are spread all over the place. All the poor creatures that were there die. Yu barely manages to throw himself to the ground and escape the attacks. After that massacre, the blood of the victims spreads everywhere, and the only one left standing is the unknown creature. The being places his hand over his face and begins to laugh hysterically. He starts mocking all the fish he killed, feeling happy about it. The laughter of that beast can be heard everywhere. Once again, Yu's intuition kicks in, and the young man feels like this monster is something he could never defeat. The creature, seeing someone moving, immediately turns around. Realizing he left a piece of trash still alive, he points the trident in Dambyuk's direction. The fake Poseidon launches a barrage of attacks at our protagonist, who barely manages to dodge and survive. Desperate, realizing he has been noticed, the boy tries to think of something. He says it would be fine if he could use wind speed, so he does, activating his ability. The boy starts running as fast as possible to survive this event. However, the unknown being simply opens a terrifying smile and in the blink of an eye, appears in front of Dambyuk, asking where the boy is going. Once again, he orders you to die while charging up another attack at the tip of his trident. Seeing that cosmic energy, the young man can only say that he doesn't want to die. An explosion is seen and a cloud of smoke takes over the area. Dambyuk survives the energy blast that passes close to his head. Suddenly, someone appears, calling that unknown being Neptune and a copy. Yu sees in front of him a blue-haired being who was responsible for him still being alive. That was really Poseidon, who was holding Neptune's trident. Neptune starts mocking Poseidon, but before he continues, he is interrupted by a punch coming his way. The god of water orders the beast to be silent and hits the being with a punch. Poseidon explains that the name Neptune belongs to him and that the dark being is just a cheap copy. He gets irritated and immediately moves to deliver another blow to his opponent. At that moment, Neptune grabs his enemy's hair and Poseidon states that the being is playing dirty. Dambyuk comments that he never imagined he would witness a fight between higher-grade gods. However, upon closer observation, they seem to be fighting like children, pulling each other's hair. Poseidon says it doesn't matter what happens. Today, he will annihilate Neptune. But the dark being retorts that this was already the 78th time the god of water had failed to annihilate him. Confident, Poseidon comments that this is why he hired an incredible god today. The man says it's time, and at that moment, energy starts to be emitted from the portal. Dambyuk thinks that for Poseidon to have personally hired this god, it must be someone truly incredible. From the portal, who begins to emerge is Hephaestus, saying that those beasts used a very dirty tactic. The blacksmith begins to return to the normal world, while Yu thinks he really is an incredible god worthy of being hired by Poseidon. However, when he looks closely, he sees that the blacksmith is coughing up blood, his body weakened. After crossing the portal, Hephaestus falls to the ground, stating that he finally got rid of all the beasts. Seeing this, our protagonist is incredulous and doubts that Hephaestus can handle Neptune. Finally, the blacksmith says he was counting on certain people since he wouldn't be able to fight. 3 figures descend from the sky and Yu observes the scene. The boy notices something impressive and sees that one of those 3 figures is Ju Suyo. The other 2 beings are a small but powerful mage and a giant. Recognizing Ju, Dambiak doesn't understand why the girl is in the world of the gods and feels confused. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.